Jiro Hinamaru snapped. Sick of his life, he packed up and bolted to Tokyo the moment a job appeared, and before he knew it, years raced by. And now in his mid-30s, he's bone-tired and buried under an avalanche of work, and barely scraping by on wages that never add up. A squeeze many of us know. Those workers were forced to grind through holidays, robbed of proper pay. One night, Sojiro walked home, eyes locked on his phone and bone-tired, stepped onto the road without looking, oblivious to a truck barreling down, and it plowed into him, dragging his consciousness into the dark. In the dark, he jolted as a woman's voice sliced the silence. She told Sojiro cold and clear that he hadn't made it through the crash. Sojiro insisted everyone who walked by simply vanished, and she laughed when she heard him say it. She recounted how Sojiro once scrubbed her statue clean. That humble act of kindness sealed a sacred favor from the goddess. She lured poor Sojiro with a sly prank, driving her to leap in and tell him she will catapult him into a parallel world that mirrors his life right now. He gets a brand new start. This time, in a whole new game, and from that angle she spun to Sojiro and asked what he wished for. He paused a breath, then confessed he wanted a peaceful life. He swore he'd never be dragged back into that dull, unsatisfying life. Before, nothing stood out. The only spark was the mouth-watering feasts he whipped up while camping in the countryside, and he swore they were the best he'd ever tasted. Sojiro burned with memories of camping under the stars and the thrill of crafting and creating things. Dreams he swore he'd chase in his next life. Elation surged through the goddess. Convinced destiny had tied them together, she pressed a shimmering relic, the craft gear, into his hands and announced it had 2 special abilities. She told him he could summon it on a whim, for now the goddess embedded crafting tools inside Sojiro's body, and after that, gratitude exploded from him as he thanked them for the present. She hurled him into a new world, pausing at the threshold to press her name into his ear. Mother Goddess Anna unleashed a cascade of blessings, drenching his body and soul until true happiness ignited, her face alight with joy. She beamed. Her final gift had landed with someone like Sojiro. Confusion gripped him. Then in a heartbeat, Sojiro burst back to life, whole and primed for a brand new adventure. First, he raced through the checks to guarantee everything worked perfectly. Amazement surged through him. It flowed easier and glided smoother than the previous one. Jiro's chest swells with gratitude. Having a regular body is fine, but a healthy one makes him feel truly lucky. Everything shifted the moment he laid hands on that special artifact. He forged some crafting tools. The moment he summoned it, the item snapped into his palm as a pocket knife, and he leaned in to inspect it. Compact, it tucks into his grip like it was forged for his hand. He cracked the secret. Say the artifact's name and it answers, summoned whenever he wants. Classic Fushiguro. But putting the divine artifact aside, more than anything, Sojiro feared getting lost in the wilderness. Yet he quietly savored the solitude of solo camping and the hush of the great outdoors. Right gear strapped, sharp as ever, every tool ready. It was time to embrace the camping lifestyle. Jiro zeroed in and scanned the scene. I rifled through this camping gear. In this new world, could divine weapons suddenly morph into ordinary tools? He clamped his eyes shut and put the idea to the test as he worked. He felt the goddess's words strike like lightning. The craft gear's second purpose was to be a tool, bending the device into whatever he imagined. The instant he did it, the object snapped into a hatchet. He had to test it, so he locked onto the nearest tree and hurled the hatchet with every ounce of power. It slammed into the trunk with a deafening bang. The trunk hurtled straight at his face. If he hadn't jerked back at the last second, it would have crushed him. He would have been flattened like a pancake. Then the tree slammed to a grinding stop and hung frozen in midair. The goddess's voice split the silence, revealing the artifact's second power. It could mend broken items outright. No ordinary crafting required. When crafting normally demands a full workshop and an army of tools, the artifact repair feature lets Sojiro conjure creations with almost no equipment. He only has to unleash his imagination. To build a birdhouse, you grab a piece of wood, set up at a workbench, arm yourself with a hammer and nails, and fetch a few other supplies. The goddess thundered he can fix anything, anywhere. If he can picture it, he can stitch the very fabric of time and space. Space. It rips away the clutter and makes everything easy. The explanation arrived late, but Jiro shrugged it off. Now that the craft gear finally clicked for him, he sprinted off to grab it. He scowled at how clumsy it felt, then blasted back to work, dead set on forging a proper staff this time. A trusty tool for picking his way over rough ground, Jero spied a branch the perfect size, snatched it up, and began whittling it into exactly the walking stick he needed. Sparks fly as he treats each tool with practiced care, finishes most of the staff's body, and dives in to carve the handle. He locked the handle on and finished in a flash. Jero tested it, liked most of it, but the grip begged for a tweak. Jero wields a razor-sharp knife and a range of handy tools, can dismantle and reassemble anything at will, and thinks those skills will keep him alive in the wild. Done with his team, Sojira steeled himself and plunged headfirst into Jumanji, a wild, brand-new realm. His first mission? Hunt down water. Water is everything. People last only about 3 days without it. Miss one day and dehydration slams in, and he kept moving. Every step a fight. North knew staying in a strange place risked his neck, but he trusted the goddess wouldn't lead him into a deadly trap. He pushed through the jungle, and with every step the difference from his old office slammed into him. Gratitude erupted in his chest. He was finally free. The instant the thought hit him, his stomach roared. Now free and starving, finding food became his only mission, and he stared in disbelief at how quickly he'd found the river. He slammed the water down, gulping fast even though it looked far too murky to drink. Thirst stayed at bay, so he dove headfirst into a blitz of island tasks in Animal Crossing. Constructing a shelter, he knew the woods nights would bite, so a cozy bed was essential. He pitched his small shelter a little back from the riverbank to dodge the damp chill, and then began gathering what he needed. He snatched a bundle of sticks and a stubborn vine to prop his shelter, setting them with surgical precision next. He hauled more branches, propped them along the shelter's slant, then smothered them with dry grass and leaves to lock out the rain. He snatched up a few short-cut logs, stacked them into a crude bed inside, then crowned it with a soft blanket of leaves. Boom, his shelter stood complete. Sitting inside, the true value of the craft gear slammed into him. Had he leaned on his usual earth tools, shaping those branches would have taken ages. He gaped as he finished the whole job in just an hour, barely broke a sweat, then threw his arms wide, brimming with energy. A nearby sound snapped him to attention. He spun around and he froze as a massive rabbit burst into view, a single horn jutting from its forehead. A white, Umbrian-like creature the size of a medium dog padded into view, and he froze, straining to judge if it was friend or foe. The beast lunged, horn driving like a battering ram. Sojiro flashed forward and blocked the strike with his staff. He fired up his craft gear and slammed his staff's jaws around the rabbit's horn. The poor creature now dangled, wildly flailing in midair. His camping know-how kicked in again, a brutal reminder that mountain wildlife is feral and untamed. Sojiro replayed the moment, thanked the goddess once more, then locked eyes with the rabbit. Sensing its fate closing in, the tiny creature scrambled to fashion It plastered on the sweetest face it could. A honeyed smile meant to dodge any trouble. Jiro flashed a grin at the rabbit, declared it his meal no matter what, then sprang into action without missing a beat. Once he'd killed the creature, he scooped up its blood, gutted it, scrubbed the carcass in the river, flayed the hide, butchered the meat, and checked the body for poison sacs. Luckily, it didn't. He spotted the creature's heart warped into a strange shape and knew instantly this rabbit was no ordinary animal. That huge horn proved it. He'd just pieced it together when something rustled behind him. Jiro whipped around and locked eyes with a black puppy, a peculiar mark blazing on its forehead. It looked like a mini Sojiro, Fushiguro's black demon dog from JJK, and his face split into a grin as the adorable pup locked curious eyes on him. It was far too charming to belong to anyone. Yet nothing about it screamed stray. He ripped the rabbit open and fed the puppy its warm entrails. The little guy scarfed them down in a heartbeat, and Sojiro's eyes locked on the tiny bow tied in the pup's fur. Maybe this little pup already belongs to someone. I only caught a blur of fur before it bolted away. Sojiro snatched the box of entrails and stared in shock. The puppy had devoured only the heart. A scream ripped through the air behind him, snapping his head around. He whipped around and spotted an elven woman balanced on a tree branch. Perched on the branch, she snapped, "Have you seen a puppy?" Sojiro hadn't even begun to answer before. The elven woman assumed he'd already eaten it. He flicked that idea away without a second thought. He swore the insides were different and showed her exactly where the puppy had vanished. Relief crashed over her, and she exhaled a long, freeing sigh, whispering, "Thanks, Sajiro." He tore off hunting the lost dog. "All right, let's get back." Jiro snatched together everything he needed. Shelter over his head, a bed to crash in, food to fuel him, water to keep him alive, but the one thing that mattered most was fire. Starting your own fire is a battle. Without the right supplies, sparks fizzle and the flames never take. He scavenged dry pine branches and firewood, snatched up his crafting tools, and carved a bowl to cradle the spark that would start the fire. He eyed the bow drill, set its spindles screaming until an ember flared, then boiled water in a bowl carved from jaw tree bark. Sojiro ripped materials from the nearby trees and local resources, then eyed the water, blew across it gently, and dared a tiny, testing sip. He dared a sip. Nothing odd hit his tongue, so he convinced himself he'd be fine. Then went for the meat. A scrap was already sizzling on a tiny stone plate he'd sliced from a chunk of rock, and he turned back to his dungeon tasks. He seared the meat until both sides gleamed with perfect doneness, then slid it onto a wooden plate and served it at once. He burst out, "Thank you," each word crackling with raw, aching gratitude. He took a bite, and the rabbit meat's rich, savory flavor slammed into him, leaving him breathless. The meat is as soft as chicken, but its flavor roars with rich, duck-like depth. For a plain hunk of meat, Sojiro couldn't stop gushing about how insanely delicious it was, each bite tasting like a hard-earned victory after all the brutal work that made it. Once he'd swallowed the last bite, Sojiro sat glued to the fire, drinking in the wood's sharp crackle as its cozy heat seeped into his bones. Comfort he'd gone without for ages washed over him as he polished off his meal and pitched his shelter. Judo finally sank into relaxation. Warmth was his lifeline, and even with only the bare basics, he'd already secured it. In Sojiro's head, the hunger for more felt like the only sane truth. He was already mapping the perfect wall and table decorations when the puppy he'd seen earlier barreled back in and yanked him out of his reverie. The elf vanished, leaving him alone with the puppy. Sojiro stepped up and fed the little guy a piece of meat. He swore he'd track down the dog's owner at first light. For tonight, they crashed into sleep, curled up side by side. The following day, Jiro tore into the streets to track down the pup's owner. The owner strode off with a ladder tucked snug in his bag, so Jiro quickly scratched a mark to help him find his way back. While he did this, one question hammered at him. Were there more elves like her? The puppy's ears snapped upright. It launched down, a fierce growl ripped from its throat as the small dog crouched low. A low, savage bark exploded at something Sojiro couldn't spot. Moments later, a blood-curdling scream tore the night. He knew a monster screamed. It wasn't the cry of a beast fighting for territory. It had to be locked in combat with the elven woman they'd seen. He barreled toward the scene as the noise swelled into a thunderous roar. The elven woman he'd seen earlier was locked in a savage clash with a griffin, wearing nothing but a towel. She was ambushed in the tub, and just as everything threatened to explode, the puppy crashed the scene. The instant the monster locked eyes on Jiro, he unleashed a sharp bark to distract it, and the beast shot straight at him. Ladder braced, he ripped through his gear and slammed a hammer into his hand, and launched it like a missile, burying it in the monster's chest. The griffin slammed into the tree and went down, out cold. Again, Jiro got a brutal reminder of just how risky his craft gear can be. He couldn't linger. A familiar voice cut through the noise, and he spun to find the elven woman beaming as she complimented him for she felled the griffin with one thunderous strike. And as Sojiro stared, her magnetic presence stole his breath for a heartbeat. He forced himself to stay composed. She shrugged it off, casually apologizing for snapping. She'd just been ambushed by a monster mid-bath. And Jiro blurted out his own sorry. He practically begged that he hadn't meant to intrude. He was just an ordinary human. After hearing that, she spat that no one could have pulled off what he'd just done to the griffin. And before they could argue it any further, Jiro thrust his clothes into her arms like a shield. She wrapped them tight around herself and poured out how brutal it had been to. They held the griffin at bay with nothing but a short sword. She swore she'd pay him back. Sojiro waved it off and told her not to stress. Since the little black pup had kept him warm through the night, the elf woman confessed she'd discovered. She cradled the abandoned puppy under her coat as its parents vanished, unaware she'd soon be the one crying out for rescue. Then, shh, she declared her name, Misty, a high elf who dwelled in the great tree's holy woods, and Jiro agreed. Later, finally freed, He gasped that he'd only set foot in the forest yesterday. Misty finally slipped it into something proper and leaned in, fishing for praise from Sojiro. His blunt honesty ignited a giddy spark in her. Focus snaps to the bigger crisis as other demons ransack Misty's things, stripping her down to just a few clothes. They even snatched her bow, and rage flared in her. Sojiro, ever polite, suggested they head to the nearest village if there even was one. When Misty heard his idea, she scoffed, unenthused, and snapped that the village lay miles away. She'd spent the past 10 years alone in this forest. Sojiro's eyes snapped wide, confusion clawing at him. Was there a hidden story? She'd said she left the village long ago. Think it's silly? She's rooted in the forest, refusing to leave, stubbornness burning inside her like wildfire. The divine tree forest still thrums with the elven ancestors' sacred presence. Misty's people were driven out and can no longer call it home. Right now, only animals and trees claim the forest. Misty plunged into the space, scheming how to wring every ounce of potential from it while he'd only been in the area a day. And Juro stared at the untouched forest, baffled it had remained that way so long. He was dead wrong. Misty gaped in disbelief. Was he really that clueless? Misty unsheathed her sword and carved deep, savage grooves into the tree. She smashed her fist into the bark to prove it was as hard as solid rock, and the creatures and plants here pulsed with raw, terrifying power. Powerful. She revealed the forest's ancestors built this place because they kept losing the treasures that helped them manage their battles, and so Jiro snatched his crafting tools and plunged into carving the bark. The bark snapped as the blade cleaved into the trunk, sinking with chilling ease. It slid in like cutting through a marshmallow. Misty refused to back down and drove it deeper into the tree, turning the jab into a defiant dare. She shoved with brutal force, but the blade still wouldn't bite. Fine. She threw in the towel, admitting she couldn't win this time, and Jiro blurted that he depends on the object clenched in his fist. He hoisted it and proclaimed it a sacred relic. Once, he'd explained, Misty bowed again, her reverence unmistakable. She'd been unknowingly talking about the sacred one the whole time, and so Jiro, hating that title, pressed her to speak like she always did. Then his eyes went wide in stunned disbelief. His jaw dropped when he realized the artifact was worth far more than he'd first believed. Misty said she'd do it. Go grab some salt. There's still some tucked away in the secret warehouse. Salt is the lifeblood of every kitchen. But Sojiro refused to let Misty do all the work. She planted her feet, fierce and unyielding, swearing she's a woman of her word and already owes him a great deal before he could argue. Misty darted off to fetch salt, leaving Sojiro alone with the puppy once more. Even in that sticky predicament, he marveled at how calmly she handled it. That feeling echoed in the goddess. He vowed to thank her with a meal and sprang to snatch up his pots, pans, and knives. Misty raced along the flats, snatching salt like treasure, while Sojiro prowled the shore, gathering ingredients for their meal together. He snared the same rabbit again, and this time foraged wild greens that looked like those from his old world, hoping they wouldn't cause him any stomach trouble. Yesterday he pressed them to his skin and took tiny, daring nibbles to see if they were safe to eat. Eat! Moments later, Misty burst back with a bag of salt and stopped dead when she found Sojiro in the kitchen. She thrust the rock salt into his palm, whispering a shaky apology that it might not be enough, but he took it, gratitude surging through him. Consumed by guilt, she swore she'd make it right and help him any way she could. She admitted her magic barely flickered, and she was stuck fighting with only a short sword. So why couldn't she just storm into town and buy what she needed? She snaps that it's impossible, she's flat broke. She froze. She'd misplaced the trading goods, and a weary sigh ripped from her as dread coiled in her gut. Sorting this chaos with the little one to care for would be brutal. Juro leapt at the chance to shoulder the responsibility. He's hopelessly devoted to dogs. Misty's gaze snapped to the dish he was preparing. She was utterly riveted. Jiro, cool and focused, coaxed a rich broth out of the rabbit's meat and bones as he guided us through every exact step. It tasted amazing, but he ached for a splash of dashi to crank the flavor up a notch. Misty froze. The idea hit her like something utterly alien. Excitement crackled through her. The massive rabbit he'd caught for dinner made her mouth water, and she could hardly wait to taste it. Curiosity flickering in her eyes. Jiro leaned in, eyes glinting, and asked, "If I'm not around, how will you prepare the rabbit?" She snapped she'd skin the rabbit herself and roast it. Hearing classic spices lit a spark in Sojiro's mind. He snapped to McCormick jars and every other seasoning on the shelf. He kicked worries aside, told Misty to go have fun with the puppy, and dove into finishing his cooking by the end of the day. Sojiro couldn't resist good food. Raised in a world of cutthroat culinary battles, he lived and breathed flavor. At last he revealed their dish, a steaming rabbit grass soup paired with a smoky, perfectly grilled rabbit tenderloin. Misty scooped a spoonful, tasted it, and a grin of pure delight exploded across her face. The soup was insanely delicious. Jiro savored his, and once the plates were cleared, he realized today's rabbit meat was even more tender and flavorful than yesterday's. Misty leaned in, eyes sparkling, and suggested he name the puppy. He longed for the little guy to have something truly meaningful. Jiro seized the name Matsukas, ripped from the legend of the warhorse that once thundered beneath Samurai Lord Toshimasu Maeda. Misty doesn't need to know he christened the puppy Matsukaze after that famous Samurai Lord tale while soaking in the tub. She's just ecstatic that Matsukaze finally has a name. So Jiro lunges to change the subject, pushing them to scavenge the griffin's body for anything useful. She snaps that its meat can be eaten, but it tastes awful. They could wield the griffin's razor claws and the hulking stone as brutal weapons. A gem forged inside a mighty magical beast, usually cradled in a flesh pouch right against the heart, making that exact spot the creature's most vital, dangerous prize. Misty urges them to snatch it. Everyone treats it like treasure, but she bites her tongue, not wanting to inflate their expectations. They sprinted straight to the griffin's remains and snatched the mastone. Misty had predicted the mast was shattered by Sojiro's earlier blast, so Sojiro locked his aim on the creature's head to keep the mastone intact. Misty shrugged it off, and he fired a sharp warning at him. Some creatures are brutally powerful. With the griffins broken en masse, she told him to pass it to Matsukaze, and Sojiro agreed. She warns that though Matsukaze is still a pup, a demon beast seethes inside him and he must absorb more magic to unleash his true power. That raw power explains why the tiny creature was tearing into the rabbit's insides the moment they crossed paths. They pry at the griffin's razor claws, while Misty declares those talons can purify water. Drop them into drinking water and your stomach won't bat an eye. They ignite healing and lock in freshness, acting like a natural food preservative. Jiro planned to ask for just half the hook claws, but Misty pushed him to take the whole lot. He figured he could saw them in two later, and Misty agreed at once. While she was at it, she blurted out a bold request. Could she plant her base right beside Sojiro's? A spark of kinship ignited in Matsukaze. Staying at his side suddenly felt like the only right move. Soji caught her breath for a heartbeat, but she was right. He'd be lost without Matsukaze and Misty's support, and Misty, catching the hurt in his eyes, stepped forward and broke the silence. She confessed that if she were in Sojiro's shoes, having someone at her side would make her so much happier. New places hide countless wonders, so someone to lean on would be a blessing. Sojiro chuckled at her words, yet a sliver of truth cut through. He froze the instant their paths first crossed. Their paths collided, his first ever meeting with an elf, and she reenacted the whole moment, pouring on extra flair. The moment hit him and Sojiro exploded into laughter, a sound he hadn't unleashed in years. Misty flashes a mischievous grin and suggests everything would be so much better with someone like her around. A cheerful smile slammed into him, proving he'd truly started over. The world races so fast he sometimes stumbles to keep up, but seeing Misty now soothes and steadies him. He leans in and declares he should be the one to ask her to be friends, and the three of them choose to move in together. Relentless monster attacks left Misty's home a ramshackle shack, and Sojiro couldn't bring himself to call his old place home. They agreed to hunt down a nicer place to live, and the moment they found the spot, they sprang into action. Misty began rigging monster repellent while Sojiro volunteered to build her a whole new house, and she gasped as building another house didn't faze her. Sojiro had already snapped into fix-it mode, ravenous to master the craft gear and dead set on getting better. Misty stepped aside with a curt nod and let him press on. With Misty gone, he seized the chance and plunged headfirst into his project. He kicked things off by prepping the area. He plunged his shovel into the soil, ripped it out, packed it back in, then smoothed and tamped it until the ground lay perfectly even once he'd figured that out. He zeroed in on the frame and began sculpting the trunks. And on day one, he learned the hard way that a rushed cut could send a trunk crashing down on him. so he angled every chop to stay safe and kept at that steady rhythm. In a flash, Sojiro stacked a pile of logs the instant Misty returned from casting her monster-repellent spell. Her jaw dropped as Sojiro ripped through it in a blur. She played it cool, downplayed the spotlight, then shot a sly grin and declared she was the true magician of the pair. Seeing Sojiro eclipse her achievements, Misty wondered if she could jump in and shoulder more of the tasks. Sojiro enlisted her to muscle the logs back into place, just like when he built his first shelter. He hoisted massive logs and lashed them into a rugged timber frame for the new building, then chose a square layout and crowned it this time with a steep, slanted roof. He swathed the new house in strips of tree bark like armor against rain and storm, completely encasing the structure. The only catch is the interior stays stubbornly dim. Misty summoned a blazing orb that ripped through the gloom and flooded the space with brilliant light. Jura hunts forlorn, aching to wield magic, and the elven noble reveals she can hardly sense any power in him. He's a pale echo of Astadot. Juru ripped a chunk from the wall to carve a door, then hammered up a blazing fireplace so they could warm themselves and cook without stepping outside. He ripped into the soil, carving trenches around the house to funnel rainwater into a makeshift drainage channel. He slipped away to steal a quick breather with Matsukas by the riverbank. Misty burst in and declared to Sojiro that the local soil could be used for construction. She leaned in way too close to Sojiro. She froze for a beat, then whipped her arms wide and declared the only thing she'd do was gather supplies to fortify the house. Jealousy ignited in Jiro. She can wield magic, and he thinks that's absolutely incredible. Misty heard him and fired back, warning him never to underestimate magic. Magic was shockingly useful. It summoned no smoke or flames and was effortless to use. As he pondered this idea, Misty exploded with excitement, gushing about how incredible it would be to bring your thoughts to life as... With Sojiro at her side, she blurted she'd never even seen a shovel before. She'd been mistaking it for a scoop. After the break, Sojiro snapped into action, determined to pin down exactly how the two differed. They ripped muddy soil from the riverbank, whipped it into wall paste, and slammed in extra materials to toughen and fortify it. They slapped thick putty over the outer walls to snuff out every draft, wedged a slab of bark across the entrance as a makeshift door, and in a heartbeat had forged a new shelter. Misty's jaw drops again. They crammed so much into one day, and she can hardly believe this place is already her home, while Sojiro beats himself up, convinced he didn't do enough. He'd thrown together a rickety makeshift bed of dried grass and tree bark. He vowed to build a better bed the next day, drawing a teasing poke from Misty. Even in this new world, she could read a man who fusses over his bed as someone who's probably been to brothels, and Sojiro flushed mortified, cut off just to, "No, it's not like that." Fast forward to later that evening. Misty drops by Sojiro's house, promises she'll switch her lights off when she goes to bed, then asks if he wants his turned off too. Sojiro said he'd be up late. He was on the brink of finishing a personal project, and Misty's curiosity flared as she leaned in to ask what he was making. The moment Sojiro pressed a carved figure of the goddess into his hands, he realized he couldn't picture her face. He let her voice sculpt every detail of his creation. Misty, certain the goddess would adore it, asked the goddess's name. Sojiro leaned in and declared, "Her name is Anna, the mother goddess, the source of all gods." Misty couldn't place the name. Her mind went blank. Maybe the older elves already knew her. Sojiro pulled the figure into a tight, desperate embrace. The goddess's words hit him like a thunderclap. She'd told him he was the last one. Unworthiness slammed into him. He felt the goddess should have picked someone hungrier, someone with real drive for the role. Misty locked eyes with him and declared the goddess had chosen perfectly. A man who treasures kindness above fame and ambition. Unlike his simple wish, Misty clung to her convictions like a battle flag, unbowed. Looking back, standing by your values vindicates you. After everything we've heard, it hits like a proud, undeniable win. All this slammed into him, so a spark of confidence ignited in Jiro as Misty urged him on, saying the goddess would probably appreciate someone like him. He shot to his feet and set the tiny statue upon the small raised altar. Right then Misty returned, and finally they exchanged a quiet, relieved good night. Jiro stared at the figurine again, hunger roaring in his chest as he pictured savoring flawless, mouth-watering meals in the perfect setting before his time ran out. He poured out his thanks to the goddess once more. They rallied again, vowing to revamp the campsite at dawn. He didn't see it coming. Sojiro was moments away from facing down one of the toughest questions of his life. Out of nowhere, a barely dressed Misty appeared and beckoned him to join her for a bath before that. He's about to be slammed awake by a brutal reality. A hot, clammy shock rips him from sleep. Misty shot up at dawn, stretched like a cat, and cheered a bright "good morning" at the sleep-tousled Sojiro. She knew it. Matsukaze had planted a cheeky lick on his face that morning. He raced straight to their water supply for a drink, stunned by how shockingly clear it was. "The griffin's claws can cleanse." Jiro muttered he wanted to wash in that water, and Misty overheard, practically bouncing as she urged they bathe together. Jiro choked on his water, eyes snapping wide as he blinked twice to double-check she was real. And she was. His hesitation forced her to blurt, "Do you only bathe sometimes?" He snapped back instantly, "I shower every day." Fantastic. Misty surged ahead, but not before she declared, fierce and unapologetic, exactly why they needed to bathe together. The plan's brutal and brilliant. While one scrubs the mess, the other scans the shadows for any monsters. A rock-solid way to keep them at bay. Her explanation snapped everything into focus, and she trusts Sojiro, which is why she asked him to Misty darted in first, rinsing herself off with brisk movements while a small towel stayed wrapped around her. Sojourner hung back at a distance, gaze razor-sharp on Misty as they picked out the clear, unmistakable signs on her body. At last, Misty stormed over, declared she was done, handed him the towel he'd used, and told Sojiro she'd take it from here. Hold up. Is that the same towel she'd wrapped around herself like a bathrobe earlier? Misty snapped that it was the only towel they owned. He couldn't stop. The image of that thin cloth, wrapped around her body just moments ago, kept exploding through his thoughts. He shoved those thoughts aside when Misty summoned magic to dry her hair. It even dried clothes. Then she suggested something silly. Sojiro slipped down to the riverbank, chasing a rare, peaceful bath to wash the day's grime away. With the last of the mess banished, Sojiro laid out a modest breakfast and they savored it together. Mid-bite, Misty fires off a question about the day's plans, and Sojiro says he'll be elbow-deep in furniture and window repairs. Quality rules his work, so he assigns the hunt to Misty. She bites at the chance, eager to help. She's hell-bent on training Matsukaze too, so Jiro lunges into the task, hammering out a table and a chair, but he must first erect a sturdy work table to bear the masterpiece he's about to build. He slashed 2 slim boards, hacked away chunks from each side to shed weight, then carved a center groove so the pieces locked together. He marked an X across the floor, rigged a cross stage, and jammed a ceiling board into a makeshift tabletop, then hunched over the mock layout as his mind sketched where the windows and the chair would sit. Chairs and the bed would vanish. In moments like this, he often, "You craved a trusty pen and paper, but you grabbed whatever was at hand and made it work." Sojiro hammered and sanded until a dining table set gleamed complete. At last they could enjoy a proper meal together. Then Misty came back with a new companion. She swept in with a butterfree fluttering at her side, then whipped out the silkamos with a triumphant grin. Salguero froze, stunned. 1. The real kicker. This spirit beast actually bonds with Sojiro, forging a raw, soul-deep link. They speak without words, visions and shivers that cut straight to your core. Spirit beasts are no ordinary animals. They're believed to come from the fairy world, and the Misty speaks for the Silkimos. As she breathlessly recounts how the spirit beast burst into view and hovered above S's roof, its very presence pleading to stay with them. The spirit beast can't speak, but its emotions roar so loud Misty reads them like an open book. Silkamos rocketed to the new table and used a single flash of magic conjured a gorgeous cloth from thin air. She slams the sample onto Sojiro's table, daring him to look away. The creature vows to weave fabric for Sojiro, if it can latch onto them like it belongs there. He throws open his arms and sweeps Silkamos into their ever-growing family, and you can see the gears turn. He's starting to get it. Jiro and Misty bombarded the spirit beast with non-stop affection until Matsukaze abruptly erupted into a low, warning growl. They bristled with irritation at the family's new addition. Tension crackled in the air. Jiro sprang forward and won the puppy over with a few calming strokes through its fur. Misty's voice sliced through the quiet. "What should we name the spirit beast?" He blurted, "Call it Musubi." They stormed after the silkworm god the moment the spirit beast revealed itself as a silkworm moth. The four friends crowded around the table, and while Sojiro gushed over his new chair and table, he missed the colossal mistake racing straight at his new life. He'd just built it from scratch, jaw-dropping for someone doing it for the first time. They savor a hearty meal, and he finally lets his guard fall. Peace, for now. He shot up and slammed his hands on the table, startling Misty and poor Musubi. Misty blinked, wondering if something was up. Sojiro barked. He had to finish something fast, shoved parts onto his workbench and tore into a frantic build, snaring Misty's and Musubi's attention even more. Sojiro zeroes in on his current project, stunned he'd somehow overlooked making this one first. His priorities are completely skewed, but his craft gear sliced hours off his schedule. With every part in hand, he snapped them into place and transformed the room into his workshop. He slammed his shovel into the earth, gouging a cavernous, bone-deep pit. Next, he planted the foundation stones, then slammed wooden planks down across them. Then they hammered the walls into place as the clock screamed toward 0. He ripped into the parts and snapped a basic L-shaped structure together in seconds. He carved a small hole in the floor and jammed a rounded, log-like block into it that looked like a crude toilet, boasted a seat and a lid that, any second now, it could be flung wide open. He scooped up a fistful of leaves, filled the basin to the brim, and dunked the griffin's hooked claws into the water. He slammed the door into place. It was finished. He'd erected a functioning outhouse that now met their hygiene needs. Salguero basked in his hard-won victory. Then a cold jolt slammed into him. He'd misjudged his priorities, and the whole thing was just a short-term solution. A fierce curiosity gnawed at him. How would they ever manage their waste in the years to come? He shelved that worry for another day. Jiro dared to try it, thrill hammering through his chest. Elation surged as he soaked in the rare silence, and with everything falling perfectly into place, he bolted to tell Misty, who they swarmed over to inspect their brand-new outhouse. I watched the house spring up in a blur, rising so fast it stole my breath. Worry knotted in her gut. Sojiro looked like he was pushing himself beyond his limits, but by the next day it was obvious his effort was simply part of the job. The growing crew erupted, roaring their welcome as Musubi Swoop stepped into their ranks. It whooped in, dragging Sandslash in its wake. The little creature reared up on its hind legs, and Sojiro could only stare. An armadillo. Suddenly the thing flailed wildly, leaving Jiro baffled by its frantic message, when Misty dashed in, grinning and breathless, shouting that legendary creatures always flock to him. They call this creature Riddles. It fortifies the soil and becomes an indispensable ally for every farming task. He locks eyes with the creature and asks, "Can I name you Yukitama?" After the fertility god fades, the creature locks eyes on Misty and pushes a silent, urgent message straight into her mind. She translates the creature's words. It wants to nurse the plants, turning filthy waste into rich, life-giving soil. Jiro's heart lurched. He realized the beast planned to turn it into compost. Everything decided, Sojiro's mind snaps to the only worry left: what to feed them. He knows Musubi craves rice wrapped in leaves and a sip of salt water. What can he give this guy? Misty snaps, "Give him wood, water, and fruits." The forest teems with strawberries and other wild fruits. Surrounded by a mountain of wood, they shoved food and shelter aside, and Sojiro and the fertility god tore straight into it. They kicked things off by yanking the tree stumps out of the ground. If they'd had an excavator, they'd have torn through everything like it was nothing, but he's stuck in a completely different situation. Hard work is non-negotiable. To banish a stump, you must sever its roots, so brace for relentless digging and brutal cutting that will leave you spent. No wonder he'd been putting off the job for ages. Tools in hand, a jolt of confidence hit him. He knew most of the work would be easier. Guess what? The craft gear absolutely came through. The object snapped into a chain block and hovered in midair, utterly untethered by any tripod. Sojiro slammed the hook onto the wooden stump, planted his feet, and ripped it free. He ripped each tree stump from the earth like a man possessed, hauling them out one by one. The space lay bare. Now the fertility god seized the stage. "Take action!" Jiro called on the spirit beast to help him build a vegetable garden, and the beast plunged into the earth, turning and readying the soil. Meanwhile, Jiro threw himself into hammering and shaping furniture. After a beat, Sojiro halted and peered at Ukitama, desperate for any sign they were all right. Shock slammed him. The creature had already carved the entire field into neat furrows, every inch ready for planting. He spied the tiny critter gleefully shredding a plank of wood and burst out thanking it for its incredible work. Sojiro thrust a thick bundle of fur into Musubi's hands and barked, "Make clothes." Ukutama ripped out the spirit beast's organs and bones and fed them back into the earth as fertilizer. Matsukaze, curiosity blazing, strode up to Ukutama and caught sight of the spirit beast clutching a massive bone. Before long, the three beings erupted into play, eyes glued to them. He barreled up to Misty and demanded to know why unusual spirit animals had started showing up in his house. At the house, she revealed the beasts were flocking to bathe in Saga's heavenly presence. He'd carved a tiny statue of the goddess, and its radiant divine energy irresistibly drew spirit beasts in droves. Alarm flared in him, but Misty sliced it away with a grin, insisting it was a blessing. After all, their first meeting had been ignited by that unique spirit creature. He seized it as a blazing omen. Her words lit a fire in him, and he answered. Jiro confessed to her that being with Misty fills him with pure joy. The elven woman's composure crumbled as a fierce blush flooded her cheeks. Drunk and blissfully oblivious, he never realized he enjoyed her company because sharing a meal made everything taste that much better. Misty stormed in dragging a fresh, massive boar, proving her words were true as luck kept raining down on Sojiro and the world. Meanwhile, a shadowed figure in a cloak slipped up to the receptionist at the Adventurers Guild. The instant she flashed her ID, color fled the concierge's face, leaving it ghost white. Recognition hit her like lightning the moment she realized who she was speaking to. Iono, forged in the storm-swept heart of the Black Sea. Every eye locked on the adventurers as whispers surged. Could someone so thin really be the infamous Iono? Wasn't he the royal court's magician? The concierge pressed. He whipped around to Iona and shot, "What are they doing over there?" The truth explodes. The he is really a she, and she aches to set foot in the sacred tree forest. Crisis. Jiro's salt is about to run dry, and he clutches the last tiny grains in his hand. He whips around to Misty and snaps, "Where did you get it?" The elven noble grins and says she picked it up in the nearby human town. They roll into town, see their supplies running thin, and Misty snaps, "Let's grab everything else we need while we're here." If they peddled every scrap they'd scavenged on the road to town, they'd rake in enough coin for ink and dye. The instant he heard that, Sojiro's heart leapt and adrenaline slammed through him. Misty gaped. She'd never seen him this electrified. They charged into town with Musubi, leaving Matsukaze and Ukutama behind. Misty snaps that it'll be a 3-day trek on foot to the nearest town. By herself, she'd blaze ahead, outpacing almost anyone. A sharp sound rips through their conversation, yanking her attention. She jabbed a finger at the rising racket, breathless, and yelled to Sojiro, "Something's coming!" urging him toward the noise. A horned rabbit exploded into view and hurtled straight for Sojiro. Luck was on their side. It never got to Sojiro. Musubi barreled in, slamming into its path and stopping the strike dead before it could land. Again, they're slammed by the brutal truth. Spirit beasts are terrifyingly powerful. Don't be fooled by their fluffy appearance. Trips into town are a constant gamble against sudden monster attacks, so Jiro's lucky Misty sticks by him. She senses monsters from far away before they can strike. They learn to spot ambushes and dodge surprise attacks, but they had to stay razor alert. Groups could swallow them whole, and that happened again and again on their travels. They fought off every monster assault. Everything exploded when they slammed headfirst into their greatest challenge. Behold Koshisaju, the colossal two-headed serpent. The pair braced for battle. Sojiro coiled, every nerve alive. The hero hurled himself into danger as a living diversion, baiting the beast so Misty could take down one of its heads. She cleaved it with a lightning-fast strike, then fed the remnants to ravenous flames until nothing was left but drifting ash. The other head lunged at her like a striking viper, lightning fast. But Sojiro ended it with one savage blow as he lunged in to snatch up some gear. The snake's body snapped back like a coiled whip, nearly smashing into him, and Jiro slammed his walking staff up to stop the strike. I slammed the snake's tail to the earth. Pinned beneath my grip, it went limp and stopped fighting. Misty warned him, snapping that even with its head severed, a snake's body can still writhe and thrash. Misty barreled in and lunged straight for Sojiro, checking him the instant she arrived. He arrived. She needed him to sever one of the snake's heads before it could regrow. He slammed it with his gear, crushing the beast, and at last they put the giant snake down for good. Misty. Misty exploded with elation. They'd toppled the Kisho Saju and everyone walked away unscathed. A single strike to its head didn't put Jiro in a festive mood. He kept chewing over smarter ways to bring it down than brute smashing, and he was grateful again for how useful his craft proved. Misty exploded with giddy triumph. They'd uncovered a pristine magic stone and an expensive gall. Musubi burst onto the scene with bags in hand, tearing through the creature's remains to snatch up anything worth selling. With the search finished, they sprang to their feet and barreled back onto the path, racing toward whatever waited ahead. Bam! Another monster lunged, its savage attack crashing down on them. And then they hunkered down and pitched camp for the night. Sojiro hauled his hammock between two trees as Musubi cinched every knot tight. He'd already melted into it when Misty bellowed that dinner was ready. Dinner. Right. Dinner. They'd bite your head off before they'd forget. Tonight's feast is roasted snake with a steaming aromatic herb soup. A strange scent curled from the dish, but the first bite exploded into insane deliciousness. As they ate, Misty beamed that Sojiro would make a great adventurer after everything they'd pulled off these last few days. Jiro just shrugged, excitement nowhere to be found. The man clung to a calm, simple life, hungry for peace, plus every pleasure he savored came from the goddess gifts. At dawn, they pressed on, and before they moved, Misty called out that they'd soon spot a path down to the village. By the third day since they'd left, Jiro felt the air change. They'd walked into a patch that finally looked and breathed like a proper forest. Magic still crackles through this area, and it's crawling with enchanting creatures that torment the humans. Time and again, Misty and the townsfolk summoned soldiers to crush the pesky monsters. Those creatures kept igniting fights. Some looked tiny, but their magic made them viciously tricky, so Sojiro snapped a sharp question into the chaos. Wait, if they're magical creatures, don't they pack their own magic stones? Misty answered that only the biggest, most powerful beasts carry magic stones. You need a crack team, sometimes an entire troop, to take down a mighty magical monster. And because it's basically a death sentence, the pay is a fortune, she said after a moment. They hit the path to the human village of brown wolves. The guards at the entrance froze, jaws dropping when the elven noble's arrival blindsided them. Guest at her side, and Misty wasted no time, shoving Sojiro forward and declaring him her friend. The guard asked for only the tulfi. Jiro lunged and slammed the cash into his palm. As they stormed through the gate, he blurts. He whipped a look over his shoulder. The guard was grinning at him. What was that? Now sprint with me to Brown Wolf's Town. This little village hawks a dazzling array of wares plucked straight from the sacred tree forest. Sojiro drifted through and felt the place fold into a wonderfully calm hush. Misty laughed that she's practically a local. She's been visiting the Brown Wolves for nearly 20 years. She flashes back to the gate guard as a scrawny kid. Now he's a full-grown man, while Misty still looks like a child. She wears more years than the others. But what really gnaws at him is the guard's icy stare he caught earlier. No use lingering. They've already reached Misty's regular trading post. They'd barely planted themselves outside when a hulking man barreled out of the doorway. He fumed, spitting bitter complaints about the shopkeeper. In that heartbeat, his gaze snapped to it. He finally saw it. Sojiro, the man, closed the gap, stunned by the stranger's face, and demanded to know whether Sojiro had any business in the shop. Misty cut him off, snapping, "Were you in another fight?" The moment she appeared, he shot nervous glances between Sojiro and Misty, like someone hiding a secret. Was he with her? He'd had his fill of small talk, landed 2 friendly taps on Sojiro, then bolted like a bullet. A wiry older man burst from the store, words already spilling from his lips. He shot a quick apology toward the loud guests inside, then turned to Misty and teased that she'd shown up far earlier than usual. Misty ripped through the timeline, explaining the chain of events that landed them here. And when the older man saw Sojiro, he froze just like the big guy had. Eyes wide, stunned to see an elf with a man, a sight unseen for 2 decades. Once they'd introduced themselves, the older man snapped upright, drew a steady breath, and declared, "Darrow, leader of the trade group." Daru slid up to Sojiro and, sparked by his reply, pressed him to spell out what it meant for his ties to Misty. Darrow might even dangle a few extra perks. Misty stormed up and confronted the older man, who begrudgingly let them into his place to check out what they had. It stumbled out of his gate, but by the deal's end, Sojiro walked away satisfied. Misty had dominated the conversation. Relief explodes through him. He snagged the spices and a whole arsenal of kitchen tools. He was still savoring his new purchases when the hulking guy from earlier strode up beside him and introduced himself in a thunderous voice. They pressed him about the deal with Doro, and Jiro eagerly spilled every detail. Yet that was only the beginning. A different question burned in Cedric. Did Sojiro actually live in the sacred forest? Jiro let that slip, and Cedric snapped to attention, his interest burning even brighter. The divine forest is all but sealed off. How is Sojiro even surviving there? The trees refuse to fall to his axe, and monsters swarm every inch of the place. Sojiro snapped back instantly, declaring he lives like everyone else, as if that silenced every one of Sadex's questions. Sedex reads him at a glance and knows he's no charcoal seller. Sojiro admits he peddles wares fashioned from magical stones and strange creatures. SEDC snapped the puzzle into place. Sojiro was an adventurer. A neighbor warned him that the most dangerous magician had just come to the region, and news of the arrival sent their tiny town buzzing with electric excitement, especially when word exploded that he was plunging into the enchanted forest. Sojiro staked his claim on the place, and Saeed couldn't stand by. He shot off to give the magician a heads up. He rose to every challenge like a storm, so Jiro should finally march straight to the guild. One final razor-sharp question shot from the older man as he locked eyes with Jiro. "What are your intentions in the sacred woods?" Jiro beamed and said he just wants to whip up and savor delicious meals, his joy shining through the reply, and right then Misty burst in, screaming Sojiro's name. He spun around and Sad had vanished. Back at Darrow's place, the older man scowled, alarm knotting his chest as he muttered that the veil between the ordinary world and the other side was ripping open, and Misty's lightning-fast return with a human friend was driving the breach. Sedge barreled into the room, demanding to know why the older man needed advice. Darrow's eyes snapped to Sedge as he revealed that Sedge was in fact. The town's viscount said he'd smiled brightly, clearly reveling in Darrow seeking his counsel. And Darrow recoiled. He didn't want it. He couldn't refuse. The elven noble's task from before demanded it. Misty threw all her trust at him. He had to stare down the forest's great serpent and crush its brazen arrogance. A colossal, top-tier magic stone. People swear it cures every poison, skyrocketing its value and making it nearly impossible to sell, while the great serpent rises as a brutal, nearly undefeatable beast. Countless night missions launched and flamed out. Darrow agonizes over pricing the gall fairly so he can still turn a profit. Rage boiled in him. For something as precious as the great serpent's gall, Sojiro asked for nothing but sugar, pots, and other spices. The numbers don't add up. Rip them apart. And one brutal truth slams us. Darrow owes Sojiro money. It claws at the old man's patience. Darrow, at his age, never imagined he'd end up owing anyone a single thing. Misty pinned 100 years of responsibility on his shoulders. Syed's jaw dropped. Sagira had forged a bond with Misty and even bent the village merchant into owing them a favor tied to Misty. Dotaro showed up to a pile of fresh trade goods and a jolt ran through him. Were the two secretly unlocking ways to supercharge the divine forest? Doubt claws at SEDX. It's not fully convinced. A chill hit him. If those two lugged that colossal magic stone, Misty and Sojiro must pack serious strength. Even Sojiro, who doesn't look the part. He's still haunted by Sojiro's offhand line about hacking down the sacred forest's trees as if it were nothing. Ordinary doesn't exist there, and just the other day the magician materialized. Darryl realized the magician could devour more than a ship's load. With Iono from the Black Sea rolling into their region, he couldn't help but wonder what the magician really intended. They'll deal with that when the time comes. For now, Darrow orders Saeed to tally every item Misty and Sojiro bought in the meantime. Misty and Sojiro sit blissfully relaxed, oblivious to Darrow's panic boiling over, while Misty zeroes in on grabbing the rock salt so Sojiro can get home sooner. Guilt gnawed at Sojiro for not being able to go with Misty. What could he do? The weight on his shoulders was crushing, so they decided he and Musubi would head back first. First, as they parted ways, Sojiro urged Musubi to make a quick stop and press the Silkimos to lead him there. Yono of the Black Sea slid up to Sojiro's old hideout, a wicked grin curling across her lips. Jiro bolted back to his old shelter, desperate to seize the craft gear's power that clung to the place. It would stay there forever unless he tore the shelter apart. Knowing leaving that power behind would be a disaster, he raced back and tore the shelter down. After 2 days of travel, Sojiro and Musubi burst into view of the first shelter and found it still standing strong. Jiro had only been there a day, but the place already gripped him. His fingers froze on the seam as he went to pry it open. The Lianto shelter's interior gaped into a black so absolute it felt like staring down a bottomless void. Before the dark void could stare him down, Musubi yanked Sojiro out of its reach, senses screaming at the lurking danger. A chill crawled up Sojiro's spine. He spun around, and there, towering before him, stood a massive, panting demon bear. The creature barreled toward Sojiro. He snapped his gear into a massive mallet and braced to bring it crashing down. Just as the beast lunged for him, a strange voice ripped the silence, and a pale hand shot from the shadows of his hiding place, as if conjured from nowhere. Colossal tentacles coiled around the monstrous bear the instant Yono of the Black Sea burst into view, but her presence shattered the instant Sojiro's blow slammed into the bear. With a single thunderclap of power, he shattered it and the dark tentacles into splinters, as effortlessly decisive as Saitama's legendary one-punch. Guilt stabbed him for making a mess. Just as the bear's head slammed into the dirt, Sojiro's gaze locked on something A delicate pair of panties swung from the creature's gaping maw. "Hold on!" "Hold up, didn't someone just emerge from the shadows a moment ago?" Yono's body shook as he screamed, "No one's here!" It only betrayed her presence. Musubi zeroed in on Yono's voice. She lashed her silk like a whip as Yono shouted and argued, the silky moss yanking her from the shelter and spinning her upside down. Jiro's jaw dropped. She stood in a classic sailor school uniform, and he couldn't fathom how someone like her had wound up here. Recognition hit him like a thunderclap. He knew exactly who owned those ripped panties. The girl reeled, shaken to her core by the incident, as Sojiro's voice broke with regret over Musubi's behavior. He stepped forward and hurled his name into the silence, desperate to bridge the gap between them. I froze for a heartbeat, then inched farther back into the tent. At last, she spoke her name aloud, Ichino Chagusa. They both scrambled to apologize, words tumbling out like desperate confessions. Shame seared her after exposing that side to Sojiro, and she wanted to fling herself in front of a speeding train. Sojiro shot the notion down instantly. "Hold on!" She gets trains. Suddenly it hits me. Her name and outfit don't belong here. Chagusa admits she's Japanese, voice trembling as she confesses she's nervous about so many things. Everything was set so Sojiro could call her casually. Panic clutched her, and Sojiro had to breathe steady and coax her back to calm. Once she calmed, he dropped a bomb. He's Japanese, too, and he's always felt like an outsider in their world. That world cracked Chagusa's shell and she bared her heart. She ripped off the act and confessed she'd been living among them for 4 years. And Chagusa snapped that people from other worlds like her are almost never seen. She may be decked out in a Japanese school uniform, but she doubts she ever finished school. In this world, time crawls. People barely age, their faces holding on to youth for decades. She wears a youthful mask, but she's far older than she looks. Confidence roaring in her veins, Chagusa is itching to unleash devastating magic and prove that being a D-rank adventurer won't stop her. Curiosity ignited in Jiro. He had to know how she had slipped into the shelter he'd created. The instant his words left his mouth, Chagusa jerked back, taking another involuntary step away. Her older brother had forged that fortified tent. Chagusa said she dove inside after being blindsided by a swarm of vicious monsters in the Divine Tree Forest, and worst of all, her dark magic violently clashed with the forest and its creatures. Then, out of nowhere, she convulsed as the dam finally gave way. Chagusa opened up. They poured out every jaw-dropping twist life had taken in the past 4 years. She stared, stunned that someone as downcast as she was had become famous in another world thanks to magic. After years darting from errand to errand, the maze of court politics swallowed her, and she began rattling off every wild twist that had happened. Sojiro burst in, cut her off mid-word, and steadied her shaking breath until she calmed. In short, the instant Chagusa set foot in the sacred tree forest, a demon bear pounced. She bolted into Sojiro's shelter and took cover. She was simply trying to scrub her underwear spotless. The demon bear tore off its disguise and revealed a ferocious hapasi. We're moving on from Chagusa. Isn't Sojiro's weapon insanely overpowered? One strike sent the bear sprawling and knocked out Chagusa's tentacles, and Sojiro revealed it was a special tool he'd used to build the shelter. It stood worlds apart from Chagusa's cheat skill. No dark magic, no strong affinity. Chagusa, who couldn't walk Sojiro's path, clung to his shelter and proclaimed it her second home. Then Sojiro burst in and dropped the bomb. He'd come to tear the place down. Chagusa heard she'd erupted into a meltdown and panic attack, crushed by the shelter's relentless force. She swore the shelter had devoured a demon beast. Going home is impossible, and with her food nearly gone, she fears she won't survive much longer. Jiro shook his head. Running out of food was bad enough, but if she got dehydrated, she'd be in serious trouble. This could maim her, could even kill her. He can't just walk away and leave her out here. At last, he fired the question at Chagusa. Did she want to stay with them at their campsite? The choice was blindingly obvious. Chagusa snapped, "Yes!" After Sojiro ripped down the shelter, they stomped back to the campsite, and on the way, Sojiro pressed to learn more about Chagusa. She laughed, revealing that the name Chagusa Nantoka, the very name tied to her abilities and title, sprang straight from her special skill. She unleashed the Chagusa shadow manipulation spell. In their world, shortening words was normal, and she wielded dark magic for countless cunning purposes. Sojiro sealed his lips, letting a brutal silence tear through the room. He never imagined she'd be drowning in tears and trembling with nerves. Forget it. Chagusa can hardly catch their breath after that brutal march. Eventually, Musubi hauled her all the way to the campsite. When they arrived, Matsukaze lunged at Sojiro, smothering him in a relentless barrage of kisses. Gratitude blazed through him as he thanked Ukutama for guarding their base. Asukatama latched onto Sojiro's leg, eyes wide and breath snatched away at the sight of two adorable, fluffy animals. Chagusa's spirits shot up in a heartbeat. Sojiro flashed a grin and showed off his soft, cuddly pets. Matsukaze, bursting with excitement, barreled into her and sent her sprawling. He left her crumpled on the dirt. Chagusa's breath seized when she saw not one but two buildings rising at the campsite. She froze, eyes wide and mouth gaping, when she spotted unmistakable signs of human life right in the heart of the enchanted tree forest, then snapped a quick look at Sojiro. Disbelief surged, and she roared that only gods could wield the tree's magic and slip past the creatures prowling the woods. Sojiro teases that Chika could map entire worlds. She blushes, and the ache of everything she's endured flickers across her face. She swoons, eyes glued to the dining table laid out like humanity's crowning achievement. Jira sprang into action, hands flying as he prepared to brew tea. He blurted it out, breathless. They'd grabbed nearby herbs, mixed them together, and boiled them to make it. Nearby, Chagusa's jaw slammed open again the instant someone mentioned a toilet. Just hearing it sent a rush of thrilled glee through her. Sojiro admitted they'd run out of toilet paper and had been using leaves. Then Chagusa casually pulled out a hidden roll. Her cheerful spark was snuffed out, swallowed by a sudden heavy gloom. In a heartbeat, a dark portal ripped open out of nowhere as Chagusa yanked a sheet of paper from the shadows. She slammed it into Sojiro's hand and snapped that they could hide countless things in shadow, but not here. This place would strip every secret bare. She hid pricey jewelry inside other people. When whispers of smuggling reached the authorities, they dragged her in for a forced magic test. She learned that lesson the hard way. A local lord's accusation stripped her of nearly everything. And now they must buy food through the guild that monopolizes every transaction under the current system. Supplies only flow when coins change hands, a tactic many adventurers have learned to wield. Jiro understood the stakes and bit his tongue, while Chagusa confessed that bonds are everything in their world. No one ever showed her how to build them. Seeing her already downcast, Sojiro flashed a mischievous grin to lift the mood and revealed that an elf lives with him and will return in 3 days. Seeing the elf is female, he's convinced Chagusa will feel safer and steps forward, insisting on escorting her to the village right away. Everything collapsed around her. Chagusa shattered into sobs, insisting she would never return to the village or work again. Jiro swallowed his criticism as sympathy surged. He saw in Chagusa the same hard truth about himself, a workaholic with no one to rely on. It slammed into him like a punch to the gut. He'd been grinding non-stop, earning no thanks and only the bitter sting of unfair treatment. Sojiro watched Chagusa, and a sudden sharp recognition hit him. She was battling the same struggles he'd lived through when he was much younger. Sympathy slammed into him as tears welled in her eyes and she poured out how brutal it had been. My appetite vanished. Lately the food tastes so awful I can't bring myself to eat. Sojiro finally relented. He invited her to live with them, vowed to build her a house, and in return, she'd pitch in to help him with all kinds of tasks. About their world. Is he serious? Would he actually accept that while Chagusa stares blank and can't spit out a single useful idea? Hold up, does Sojiro plan to use her as his footstool? Chagusa was convinced he'd treat her like a piece of furniture, so Sojiro had to come clean. He needed to harness her magic. Her tentacles could single-handedly pin the demon bear down. He couldn't cloak things in the shadows, a useful skill he simply didn't have, and just 2 compliments were enough to make her light up. With magic off the table, Sojiro wagers everything on her staying to help hold down their campsite. She lunges to his side, helping him and tearing the veil off the world's hidden magic. Decision made, they dove into Sojiro's home-cooked meal while, around the campfire, they traded whispers about the stranger, and Chagusa said, "If this elven woman blazes as bright as the sun." The idea that she'd have to melt into the shadows slammed into Jiro. His gut screamed that something was off. He banked on Misty's comeback to teach them both crucial lessons about life. Once the meal ended, Sojiro leaned in and asked Chagusa for a favor. She leapt at the chance to help him as Sojiro spun clay into a brand new pot. Chagusa darted into the brush to forage herbs for their meal. Sojiro filleted the river catch and stuffed it with fragrant herbs and wild greens until every bite exploded with flavor. The instant the food's aroma slammed into Chagusa, tears welled in her eyes. It was her first real meal in 4 years. She unleashed tales of the outside world, and Sojiro's jaw dropped. The palace's food didn't stand a chance next to his cooking. She proclaimed the fruits the only delicious part of Sojiro's homemade meal, then shoved the bowl forward and demanded another serving. A grin split his face as he leapt at the chance. With the meal finished, Sojiro led Chagusa to the tent she'd put together for him, his eyes alight with excitement. The project was whipped up in a flash and stayed simple, but the latte beamed with perfect contentment. She said the shelter he'd hurriedly built earlier, hugged her like a fortress of warmth. The tent and blankets were more than enough for her. Curiosity clawed at Jira. How could she sleep for so long? Heat rose while cold clawed up from below. She had to have some kind of protection. Chagusa cloaked herself in dark magic beneath her blankets, a quietly heartbreaking sight. Jiro razzed her with a sly grin. She scored a cozier spot to sleep before they headed to his hut, and he promised the area was protected from monsters. He slipped away into the night, leaving her to sleep peacefully tonight. Chagusa fired off another "thank you," and that same gratitude surged through Sojiro. He spilled the world's secrets, and she swallowed them whole. A twinge of awkwardness seized her. She swallowed the silence and blurted, "What's your name?" again. Panicking she might have missed it, Jiro blurted his name and told her to ditch the honorifics. She'd talked for hours until her throat was raw, and that relentless chatter pulled an unexpected guest straight into Sajiru's campsite. The next morning dawned like a thunderclap. Matsukaze's playful licks jolted Salguero awake, and without missing a beat she shot a bubbly, "Good morning, Misty." Dawn slammed into him and he snapped awake, the chilling truth hitting. His elven companion still hadn't come back. It hit him like a punch. The place gaped empty without her. Sojiro shrugged off her words, slammed his hands under the faucet, and splashed cold water across his face. Just then a frantic scream tore out of Chagusa's tent. She was babbling apologies for oversleeping, even though she was a junior member. Just like Sojiro, Chagusa snapped awake, clammy and miserable after Matsukaze's strike. She was so shattered that the simple phrase "good morning" disappeared from her memory whenever someone else stood before her. Catching Sojiro mid-stretch, she teases him about doing those trendy radio exercises, and he beckons her over to join his quick routine. Sojiro's grin cracked as he tossed out the idea of a quick swim. He darted over to Chagusa and shot a quick, "Got any spare clothes?" Masubi had mended her uniform the night before, each stitch threaded with kindness, but Chagusa bit her lip and whispered for a spare pair of panties. Hapase, the demon bear, had snatched hers the day before. They strode to the river where Sojiro gave Chagusa a homemade soap forged from griffin claws. He assured her it would rip grime away. He revealed a hidden pool by the bank, pointing out a spot where she could wash with ease. The instant she shed her clothes, anxiety clawed at her as sleep finally claimed her. Her last worry whether she could bathe in her birthday suit with Sojiro just a few paces away. Sojiro stayed put. It hit him like a punch. Chagusa desperately needed a shower. She reeked, and he couldn't bring himself to say it to her face. Chagusa scrambled to smooth her hair and fix her outfit before facing Misty. Fresh from her bath, Sojiro grabbed a brush and dove into her hair. Chagusa smiled, thinking he was being sweet, while Sojiro was actually scanning the scalp for lice, or something far worse. He vowed to dazzle Misty, burning to see her welcome Chagusa with no resistance. Chagusa gaped. Sojiro gave off none of the musty old man's scent. He kept the house spotless for everyone, treating cleanliness as his quiet mission. Sojiro's on a one-man mission to build a cabin. He needs massive wooden logs for it. Now that the three of them are together, he pictures a sprawling cabin they'll all share, and the other houses turned into storage as he paused, plotting his next move, when Chagusa slid up and offered to help. Could she really handle the physical work? She wields dark magic like a weapon, yet still pulls off a few razor-sharp tricks when the moment calls for it. She wills objects into the air. The logs rise and hover while Sojiro shapes them. They hewed and honed each piece, shaving raw stock into perfect building materials. Chagusa darts in and tucks the finished logs away into the shadow space. The crafting tools shred his tasks. Chagusa's dark magic surges faster. Travel time. They froze just before assembling the cabin as Chagusa faltered. Her power could lighten the pieces, but today she still had to strain, shove, and coax each part into place with exacting effort. Chagusa unleashed more effort than she'd mustered in the past 4 years. They plunged back into work moments later. After pressing a scrap of wood into his hands, Chagusa sagged, every tremor shouting how utterly worn out she was. Jiro's grin curled wickedly as he urged her to wield the dark tentacles. They could make everything simpler for her. She stunned everyone, snapping the cabin together from the frames. The wall panels, roof, and outside walls snapped into place with ruthless precision, the whole job sailing by. Chagusa had every detail nailed down. The cabin went up in a blur, and the whole crew blitzed through the work. They slammed the final plank into place and stepped back. The cabin stood finished, and joy burst through her as she stared, breathless, at their handiwork. All blazed in his eyes as he fixed Sojiro with a stare and cried, "You're a wizard!" She insisted she'd done it all. But Sojiro's sudden, heartfelt thanks left her stunned as he declared, "Without you, we never would have built this cabin. Time to eat. Tonight we dive into bear stew." It was the very hapside demon bear Sojiro had slammed in the last chapter. They hammered at the cabin, skipped the hunt, and settled for bear meat that night. Jiro couldn't stop thinking about Misty. He knew she'd return by tomorrow morning. His gaze snapped to Chagusa, and a hard certainty hit him. He had to tell Misty every single thing that had happened. Buried in his chest, he wanted to believe his elven friend would welcome Chagusa with open arms. That's the story he clung to. The next day, Sojiro brimmed with reckless hope. Never in a million years did he think Misty would unsheathe her swords and stare down the trembling Chagusa. The following morning, Chagusa plunges her inky tentacles into the water, snatching fish with predatory speed. She snatches one out of the air and launches it skyward, but ends up hitting the poor fish. Soj observed from the sidelines, wondering why she didn't just seize it by the hand. Brace yourself. The answer hits like a punch. It looked simple at first, but it reeked. No way Chagusa will touch that without gloves. If that's true, why even cast a line into the water? Chagusa, fired up to help today, resolved to do her part by heading out to fish. She hoisted the fish high as her dark tentacles snapped forward, ready to toss it into the roaring flames and cook it on the spot. Sojiro's anger threatened to boil over. Chagusa's ink-black tentacles snatched the fish back just in time. Sojiro told her to gut the fish first to bring out the flavor. The moment she began, something crashed to the ground right beside Chagusa. They both froze as a misty voice warned Chagusa to cease her dark magic. Misty snapped to attention, weapons clenched and poised, her gaze like razor blades. He grilled Sojiro about his mental state in that instant, and a barrage of questions crashed over her. How long had they been together? Had dark magic twisted his mind? Finally, he cut through the chaos, roaring to Misty that she had misunderstood everything. Misty froze for a heartbeat. Then a somber shadow slid across her face. She snapped, eyes blazing, demanding if the dark magic user had lured him while he was gone. He flashed a confident grin, waved her worry away, and declared Chagusa absolutely no threat. Misty fell silent, stepped forward, and leaned in until her face hovered inches from his. Recognition slammed into her. This was the same Sojiro she'd known. In that split second, she dropped her guard. Chagusa hissed in disgust and yanked the slimy fish into her bare hands. Misty's eyes snapped wide. The former was shockingly different. The dark magic user cut through the rest, impossible to ignore. Misty keeps her distance from Chagusa for a reason. In their world, dark magic runs on belief, and it's born of cruel ideas meant to create disorder and harm others. Those who practice dark magic harbor souls brimming with hidden darkness. Darkness that carved their very selves and fuels savage power and ironclad resolve when she says it. Sojiro's heart lurches. He realizes it's like trusting unseen gods buried deep inside him. Inside, Sojiro crouched down to help Chagusa understand and told Misty their new friend swears by something totally different. The weekly shonen magazine. It struck Misty as oddly foreign, but she didn't press. And more importantly, at last Misty was back and he welcomed her, relief crashing through him after a few days apart. A strange little knot twisted in my gut, but they burst into laughter, shrugging it off, while Chagusa sat nearby. Eyes half closed, she nodded off with a fish clenched in her hand. Misty's attitude did a hard 180 the instant she learned Chagusa hailed from the same place as Sojiro. Now she warms to Chagusa, while the other two stand utterly spellbound by Misty's charm. Jiro couldn't wait to show Misty the new cabin. She stared in stunned amazement. The place was built leagues better than their old hut. Inside the hut, she beamed as the wooden walls trapped the heat and bathed the cabin in warmth. And he built a bed and table that folded away like a secret, instantly freeing the cramped space. In the room, both Chagusa and Sojiro slid off their shoes the moment they stepped into the cabin. Sojiro said it was just a habit rooted in their Japanese culture. Misty leapt in, kicking off her shoes too, because she wasn't about to be the odd one out. He's still tearing into the entrance, piecing together a three-part earth right in the entryway. They craned their necks at the towering, exquisitely built roof, and Chagusa grinned, confessing she'd slotted the timbers into place with her dark tentacles. Jira's jaw dropped. These two were chatting like old friends, and the woman who'd helped build it was positively glowing, her enthusiastic chatter betraying she'd loved every minute of making it. Later, Misty spotted Sagiro cradling a bowl of glinting liquid, and he told her Chagusa had gifted him olive oil they could use for cooking. His heart leapt. He rolled up his sleeves and raced to recreate the traditional meals of his hometown. Sojiro had been saving that special dish just for her, and Misty's excitement exploded into a delighted whoop. Still, why did Chagusa have so much oil? She hoarded it because she had nothing to prepare. If they plunged the fish into sizzling oil, every bite would explode with flavor. Jiro smashes the potato plants, packs the crushed pulp into a cloth, and wrings out every drop of starch. He then wrings the cloth into the water, sending particles swirling until the water turns cloudy. Once the water settles, he shrugs it off and charges into the same move again. The leftover powder at the bottom will crystallize into potato starch. Sojiro's been lacing a special cut with a bold, flavor-drenched marinade. He stashed it like treasure, itching to devour it as his reward. He blankets the meat in potato starch, then slams it into blistering oil, frying it into crispy Totsuda age. Misty and Chagusa beamed. The flavor exploded on their tongues, and Chagusa's tears of joy fell as she enjoyed the carriage for the first time in years. When fried, the potato starch blistered into a crackling shell that hugged tender, flavor-packed meat. Amid an all-out food war, Jiro was recalibrating his cooking tools when a memory slammed into him. Moments later, he thrust several skewers toward Chagusa. She inhaled sharply, eyes exploding with delight at the fried chicken on a stick. He slid one over to Misty. They both adored every second they ate together. Shock slammed into him. Then elation surged. This was the very thing he'd been wishing for. The next day, the two women sank into a steaming bath together. Sojiro's mind snapped to Chagusa. She flat-out refused to dunk her head beneath the water. It jolted Sojiro into action. He hatched a plan to use a bucket. The two women splash and laugh in Sojiro's latest creation, and his quiet life explodes into excitement as both of them drape themselves in the same cloth. Jiro methodically coached Chagusa through every step, starting by sawing the board into 10 pieces to fashion the bucket's side plates. Snapping them into a perfect decagon, I set each piece at the right angle so every segment converged and locked together at the center. He carved the plank into a trapezoid, shaving the bottom until it tapered into a narrow base. He kept smoothing it until the surface bowed into a clean curve, then grabbed every piece and lashed them together with a single taut string. Then, he shaves the top and bottom edges clean, buffs the inside and outside to a mirror shine, carves a tight channel inside, and snaps the matching bottom plate into the groove. Finally, they crown it with a bucket, the last glorious touch. Eurus flattened the plane with a practiced sweep, then snapped a bark band around it to lock it tight. After he ensured there were no leaks, Chagusa and Misty dove into the bath he'd crafted, and he watched them revel in the warm water he'd made. Joy exploded in Sojiro. Nothing fired him up like crafting something that actually helped people in need. He swore he'd craft tools perfectly tailored to their needs, but his train of thought shattered when Chagusa snapped, "This fabric isn't thick enough. It's practically see-through." While Misty reveled in its touch, Musubi's skilled hands having made it whisper soft against her skin. The fabric clung to Misty like moonlight on skin, freezing even Chagusa in awe as he stared at the elven woman's figure. Misty pointed out that Chagusa had plunged into the river's deeper stretch to ambush fish swimming close by, ready to snatch a few with her dark tentacles. She warned to keep the water glass smooth and stay silent, because any noise could draw monsters. Chagusa forced a smile and braced to lie. She'd say everything was okay, though it wasn't. The girl had slipped completely beneath the water, and Misty screamed for Sojiro's help. They ripped Chagusa free at the last second, but she was barely conscious and wrecked. Misty suspects a slime creature. Those things are irresistibly drawn to dark magic. Jiro's list of concerns swelled, so they had to stay cautious even in the bath, while Misty urged calm. Slimes rarely attack unless provoked. Chagusa shot awake the instant Sojiro's gaze snagged a sudden glint nearby. Not a treasure, just a glass bead. Sojiro clutches the cell of a wicked smile. It ripped free from its nucleus and, slick with a silky sheen, coalesced into a perfect sphere. Some folks snatch it up, flipping it into an instant payday for rookie adventurers. Misty snaps that if those glass beads have no core, they'd be harmless, so long as they really are coreless. Slimes swarm. One is manageable, but a cluster will overwhelm you. Only by shattering their cores can you beat them. Just then, Chagusa hurled a stone that shattered the glass beads into glittering shards. Panic slammed into her. She wrenched them apart before they could touch. Sojiro's eyes flared as the core shattered into a cascade of tiny spheres. He scooped them up and kept them. This world crackles with strange, breathtaking beings, and in the river, Misty plunges in and rips Chagusa away from her dark magic. Out of nowhere, Ukitama slammed into view before them. Then another popped up, the divine creature twisting and melting into a squirming, pulsing blob. Misty's heart jolted. She realized it was Ukitama's baby, even though they were indistinguishable. Jiro zeroed in on Ukitama and Katama at a glance, calling them out so no one mixed them up. Moments before she headed out to hunt with Matsukaze, Misty snatched a ribbon and looped it onto one of them. Chagusa dropped an offhand comment about Misty's habit of tying ribbons. It hit a nerve. Misty snapped and erupted into a breathless, rambling defense of why she ties that ribbon. That clever trick made the two Ukitamas impossible to mix up. Then, out of nowhere, the two women began unloading every secret onto each other. Misty finally cracked and blurted out her embarrassing hobby. She collects ribbons. She pleads with Chagusa to silence the secret from Sojiro, but the truth's already spilled. He's already heard every word. He charged in to stop Chagusa and Misty from erupting into a fight. Sojiro had already spotted the ribbon earlier. His fond smirk said he found it charming too. Jiro, every inch the good guy, flashes a warm grin and tells Misty it's perfectly fine to revel in what she loves. He's certain Misty radiates a love for all things adorable, and the moment she heard him say it, a spark flared and she barreled into a challenge against Red. She playfully wallops Sojiro's shoulder to hide the furious blush creeping up her neck. Like a shy shoujo heroine come to life, she snaps at him, calling him out. As a divine being, he mustn't be flirting with anyone else. Misty rockets off with Matsukaze to kick off their usual hunt, leaving Sojiro dumbfounded and rubbing his shoulder. But where did she vanish to as the gloomy girl tore into the woods? Guilt gnawed at her for letting Sojiro and Misty down, so she darted into the woods to harvest wild herbs, clutching them like an apology and praying they'd be enough to keep her from being sent away from the campsite. Chagusa burst in just as Sojiro was unveiling his new plans, including an outdoor barbecue space. Desperate for concrete to make it rock solid, she jumped in and cut him off. She pressed the herbs into Sojiro's palm, eyes on the floor as she pleaded not to be cast out. He won't send her away. Sojiro's mind snagged on the miwatsushi, the traditional entrance flooring of Japanese homes, and Chagusa stared, stunned that Sojiro had crafted a building material like that. Jiro snaps that he's rounded up almost every supply. Only slaked lime and eggshells are missing. She suggested they inspect the bird nests. What were they supposed to do with the eggs? Eat them? Jiro insisted they smash them open. Inside could be a yolk or a half-formed chick sickened Chagusa. Calming her took a long while, and he figured they'd deal with that nightmare when it surfaced. He was laser-focused on keeping their outdoor space pristine and weatherproof. Chagusa felt the care in his voice every time he talked about the campsite. He couldn't stop gushing about Soljero's blazing passion for these matters. Honestly, Jiro insisted that how you present yourself, your appearance and bearing, holds huge sway at the dining table. Ignore those details and you're cramming garbage into the scene. That's a bit of an overstatement. Chagusa would be far more content in a nicer environment, wouldn't he? He's right. Chagusa can't tear his eyes from the little house he built nearby, and Jiro said he raised that tiny hut as an offering to a god. He hadn't even held a groundbreaking ceremony yet. He vowed to build a small shrine for the deity and toiled, hammering out roof after roof until the more he pictured it, the more the structure morphed into a tiny house. So Jiro stopped halfway and somehow came away with an adorable little birdhouse that doubled as perfect practice. And then Misty popped up out of nowhere, pulled in by their chatter the moment she spotted the tiny house. Chagusa revealed Sojiro had been using it to practice building a real one, and Misty burst into excited questions, desperate to know where her room and Chagusa's were. Heat rose in Chagusa's cheeks. She didn't mind crashing up in the attic, but Matsukaze sprang out of nowhere and barked at Misty, snapping her back to focus, and she remembered Misty had actually hauled in a huge fish and needed help. She needed help hauling it back, so Jiro urged her to take Chagusa while he readied the haul for dissection. With that, the two women slipped out the door just as Sojiro fired up the stove and plunged into making dinner. A friendly voice suddenly rang out, greeting Sojiro as Legeria Master. He snapped his head around, hunting for who'd spoken, and then he watched the tiny cabin's door fling wide open. From thin air, an ethereal, fragile figure burst into view before Sojiro. A fairy. Silver hair shimmering, she reveals how the fairy world has been feeling. She'd been dull lately. Then she stumbles into a tiny pocket bursting with life. With a steel-hard gaze, she faces Sojiro and declares to him that this house will be claimed by a skilled fairy. A gifted fairy pledges to help Sojiro, even calling him master, her swift wings beating so fast they hush the air. Misty flashes a smile and declares this talented fairy could be something special. But Soju sees straight through her words. That's his answer to her, and she honestly admits she has no clue. They meet for the first time, and a yawning chasm already separates them. This screams trouble for Soju. Mistia, fed up with the fuss, scoffs at the fairies and urges Soju to shove them aside and move on. She beams and insists fairies aren't bad. The little one right there even offered to help with the chores. And Jiro? He swallows his words. If those fairies aren't malicious, she can march into the house and make it hers. The fairy rockets past him, showering her master with breathless thanks, and he burns to learn her name. The skilled fairy snaps, Sinaya, that's what I call myself, she tells him. Right then, Chagusa breezes over, hollering Sojiro's name. She calls out where to put the meat they'd prepared earlier. Then her eyes snap to a fairy sliding into view. Scenario explodes forward, driving a lightning-fast kick straight into Chagusa's face. As his whisper slips out, pint-sized gentleman Chagusa crashes to the ground. No guilt stained the scene. She froze when a shadowy creature now guarded the regalia, and as the skilled fairy, she had to dive straight into the danger. Jiro throws himself between them and Chagusa, a living shield, declaring to the fairy that Chagusa is harmless. Sad, but undeniably true. He hoists Chagusa into the air like a squalling child, Chagusa howling with sobs. I'm sorry, little one. Chagusa starts, When you mention a small humanoid, doesn't that typically refer to that sort of thing? She brushes her off with a sharp shrug, pivots to Sojiro, eyes locking on him as she snaps, You getting bad dreams? And Sojiro insists he isn't. Mistia barges into the chat, throws her weight behind Suju, and Suju shrugs off Chagusa's gloom if that's what the fairy wants. Really? Even Sonaria agrees it's hard to believe. Just once. If the fairy whispers a single apology, Sujiro will think better of her master. Regardless, what Sujiro really wants is for the fairy to apologize to Chagusa. Look at her. She's trembling. and Sanaya, the skilled fairy, stands ready to obey her master's command and apologize to the dark creature. But Chagusa's tear-streaked face stops her in her tracks. She chokes out, "What's the matter?" Then steels herself and snaps, "I'm not afraid. A strong fairy has nothing to fear." Fear laced through her trembling all the proof anyone needed. And when Sojiro told her to play nice and get along with everyone, she swallowed hard and said she'd give it a shot. Soon Chagusa bolted behind Sojiro the instant scenario appeared. Sympathy flared in Misty for Chagusa, and the Sojiro compound swung open its gates to welcome another newcomer. The resident now sprawls on the couch. It does its job, but screams for style. Sanaya requested a neoclassical redesign, a bold, unexpected choice, don't you think? That day, Sojiro's heart slammed. He realized the scenario was strikingly out of the ordinary. She insists on adding soothing designs to the legs and edges. Art proves their calming power, and snaps that animal fur or fabric alone won't boost comfort, so she tells him to make and add an air mattress. Sounds brilliant. Except Soju has zero material that can block air. Scenario reveals that deep in the forest of sacred trees bleed rubbery sap, and if he can snatch that stuff, he has to deliver them into Moss and Musubi's hands. Fuse them with fabric and they can finally start crafting things. Wow. Jira had no idea. The fairy goes on to... Scenario explains the Shinju forest was forged in the Age of Gods, teeming with helpful plants, and she believes only wise use of those gifts will keep the land in harmony. Jiren strains to follow, but only snatches fragments of her words. She finishes explaining and fires the question straight at him. Did he ever feel any attraction to her? The remarkable fairy snaps, "Absolutely not." Jiro tensed at her question while Scenario blinked in bafflement. Hadn't she just flaunted her skills? "She's tiny," Jiro snapped, saying she's playing up that small but impressive act. "Tell me, are you getting a little too wrapped up in yourself?" Scenario swallowed his pride and barreled forward. She sets out to gather rubber and asks Jiro for a sharp tool, so Jiro forges a tiny dagger for her. She's so tiny the blade feels like a dragon slayer in her hands. She whirls it, eyes wide with awe at how useful it is. Without warning, she blurts, "You should build your own bed." Soju demands to know why. Scenario shrugs and snaps, "It'll be useful." She rockets into the sky. What an odd creature, every habit stranger than the last. Just as she's about to move on, Soju bellows from behind, asking for help once she's finished gathering the sap. Scenario whips around, locks eyes with him, and soothes, "You don't need to worry about this." Suddenly, she rockets over to Chagusa, hoists her into the air, and bellows to Soju that she's strong. Suddenly, Chagusa shot upward, hovering in stunned disbelief. Tiny Sanaya, deceptively small, bristled with surprises, and out of nowhere the fairy let go of poor Chagusa. Sojiro lunges, snatching her from midair. The fairy whoops, "Great catch!" Overwhelmed as the gremlin clings to Sojiro, Chagusa clamps down on him, nearly coiling her body around him. "Fairies give me the creeps," she shivers. Meanwhile, Scenario fights the urge to rush finishing the bed. With Sojiro in the room, that won't fly. There's no rush. The next day, Sojiro's brimming with cheer. A mischievous fairy upended his chores yesterday, and now he's refashioned the home altar into a full-blown temple. Inside, the neoclassical style she desired unfurls. A tiny statue of the mother goddess presides, and Jiro stands back, pride burning as he admires his creation. Musubi and the fairies dive down above him. Musubi lands squarely on his head, and Sojiro looks up, wondering if his moth buddy's secretly loving it. Sentia, a skilled fairy, sparks the idea to splash more color, offers to brighten everything with flowers, and tells Sojiro to craft small flower pots. She scans his work one last time, then snaps, "Keep them small." Sojiro nods sharply at her point as Musubi rips a blazing magic circle into being out of nowhere, and he wonders if his moth friend is ready to join in. Musubi whipped out a scrap of cloth and unfurled it across the little temple, draping the tiny shrine in an instant. Musubi's on the hunt for some fancy cloth. Sojiro caught the hint and vowed to add one. As he laser-focused on his task, the fairy leaned in and blurted, "What did you thank the goddess for?" Soji's dreams have burst into reality, and all he wants is to shout his thanks. The quiet wish he whispered the moment he was reborn? It's been answered without fail. His hands move like a master's, forging even more. And that's only the beginning. Shockingly friendly neighbors pitch in on the hunts, and he couldn't want anything more for Sojiro. This is enough. Sonoria keeps hurling inappropriate wishes at the goddess until his patience snaps. He storms over and flat out tells her to stop dragging the goddess into those requests. Sonora can only exhale, doubt gnawing at him as he wonders what he really understands about it. Isn't he the one who makes wishes come true? What is she trying to say? Sojiro remembers doing the exact opposite. Darkness roars with a raw, impossible-to-ignore power. Sonora starts, dreaming of savory feasts and a safe home. She reminds him he's already given her those comforts. And then she pauses, thinking, now that I said it like that. Jiro's eyes sharpen. He finally gets it as the fairy reveals Misty's playful stunts with the ear-tipped girl are a constant headache for the humans and their friends. Soju lunges in without hesitation, and Sojiro's brow knots as he leans in and snaps, "What do you mean by that?" Mistia declares she wants the Shinju Forest's creatures and their spirit animals to benefit from them, and Jiro's mind jolts to her earlier hint. Can her wish really be a problem? Senia's convinced the whole outcome hinges on what Mistia plans to do with it. She knew only the long-eared creatures could stitch the forest back to life. Misty vows she'll never unleash it in battle and throws herself into protecting it. It endured, even as nations waged relentless war. Hold up, there's a war? Misty is still hunting peaceful ways to use resources while the battle rages? The scenario proves true, infuriating those in charge as people are swept into violent chaos, while Mistia stays laser-focused on rescuing endangered animals. Powerful figures from every corner turn their backs on her pleas. With no one left to stand beside her, she knows she can't seize this dream alone. Some will fake their promises, but she's an elf. The scenario urges him to forge a binding curse. Sojiro's pulse quickens as he turns the idea over in his head. What if Mistia swore she'd never unleash it on the battlefield? What if she unearths something even more powerful and can't wield it? Then everything would explode into chaos, and Jiro knows this forest's charcoal can melt iron. This transforms it into a coveted resource standing toe-to-toe with coat coal. He still refuses to bind his honor to mere trees. He won't promise over them. Scenario cuts in, voice sharp. "I'm the outsider, the only one who truly gets Misty." She slams the question at him. What does he plan to do with the forest next? Sadek fired that question at him because Jiro has no grand dreams and hasn't figured out how he'd use Shinju's forest, but he knows, dead sure, exactly what he doesn't want. He wants more. Jiro's had it with bland food. His old life pushed him over the edge, and I hunger for extra ingredients to whip up mouth-watering meals I can actually savor. So he tells Scenario this is a place he'll cherish. This is how I want to live, crafting with my own hands, pouring care into every piece, and watching life grow richer with each creation. He stared down at his hands when a lightning bolt of clarity hit him. He felt a fierce connection to Misty's mission and burned to help. "Help!" Scenario cocked her head in curiosity. Family ties pulsed between them, and Jiro snapped that for those who don't care, it's just a bunch of pointless stuff, but she's convinced it could help someone. It's all about feeling appreciated. Sparking joy proves your actions matter and linger in people's memories, maybe even beyond that. When someone else treasures what you hold dear, the feeling hits. He tells the fairy, "I get it now. I'll help Misty make her dream real." And he reflects on that truth sinking in. Mistia is alone. Her vision blazes like a lone torch and no one else sees it. Months have bled away while she's been lost in this forest, and Scenario's words slam into him. He's one of the few in this world who still truly cares. She snaps the conversation back to the flower pots. "Finished yet?" she asks, then curtly motions for the cloth. He bristles because he's only making them for the love of it, not to be bossed around like some ex-boss. The next day, the little shrine is carpeted in tiny flowers and bursts with vibrant color. The skilled fairy, utterly enthralled by the temple and darting off to show Sojiro, she beams with bright joy. He shoots back a grin and soaks up her kind words. The Sojiro pull every drop from that river to survive outdoors, but when rain hammers it, the waters churn and stay murky for days. Getting close then is a reckless gamble. We could bolt up a rainwater tank to catch every drop, but it would saddle us with non-stop upkeep and strict conservation. And now we're stuck with the consequences. Jiru and Chagusa bask in the perfect day as he beams that now, with rubber, collecting water will be far simpler and the rain won't derail them. So today, they brandish shovels and tear into the earth to dig a well. He races to Chagusa for help. She grins and jumps in, eager and all in. Hold up, this is the exact same well Setiko bursts out of? Chagusa grins and proposes moving it a little farther from her home. Jiro sees her shaking and instantly knows. This time, they'll build a hand pump. Strap in, we're about to build a hand pump. Jiro flashes a grin. That one's from way back. He spotted it ages ago and still remembers exactly how its mechanism clicks into life. A pump is a giant syringe. It yanks fluid in, then blasts it out, and it's built from two main parts. A piston slams forward while a cylinder clamps everything tight, and they roar to life instantly. They wield the exact technique they used to craft the earlier wooden bucket, coaxing the pieces into a slim, elongated tube. Next, they bolt a base plate with a giant hole dead center onto the tube's bottom, finishing the structure. Next, our focus snaps to the piston as Jiro sculpts a chunk of wood into a tight cylinder, then files it down until it's perfectly smooth. They secure a strip of supple leather to the side so it climbs about a third of the way up, and Jiru leans into Chagusa, saying that with each rise and fall, the leather hugs the cylinder wall and glides smooth as silk. So Jiru keeps at it, drills a dead center hole into the piston, then sculpts a rubber disc that snaps perfectly over it. They snatch the copper sheet they bought in town, slice it into a clean square, tip one end up a touch, then clamp the copper plate tight onto the rubber disc. Drive the patch down until it seals the hole completely. Make sure that hole lies directly beneath the copper plate. Next, they lock down the exposed section of the rubber disc. The copper in this setup lets water surge up from below and make the rubber balloon out. When water pours down from above, it slams the rubber shut like a lid and turns it into a valve. At last, the piston stands finished. They slam a rod into place, anchoring the piston to a handle lodged inside the cylinder. The device teeters on completion. The moment of truth has arrived. Jiru pours water into the cylinder and hunts every seam for a single betraying leak. Not a single drop dares escape from the sides or the bottom. He slams the piston down and water gushes forth. Pretty slick. They snap the final pieces into the pump and bolt a base to lock the bottom plate in place. At last, the hand pump stands primed for action, ready to spring to life at a single pull. Next up, the valve base. Jiro snatches a board and an eraser, and Chagusa jumps to the wrong conclusion. They swear they heard him say ball base, like a cat's toy. Jiro bursts in, declaring that while they patch the cylinder's base, they must build a second valve alongside the piston, 2 valves in all. They yank water up and blast it out the top. Then they snatch a sturdy wooden board that fits the pump and drill a round hole dead center. They chisel a slanted rim around the hole. Secure a rubber strip along the slope and press it down hard until the seal locks tight. They slam a trapezoidal frame of sticks onto the board's underside and cinch it down tight. They chisel the stone into a truncated cone that fits the opening, bolt a straight wooden rod to its center, then shove the whole contraption through the hole in the board, and cement a hulking round stone onto the far end, completing the valve base. So Jiru leans in and shows Chagusa. He wedges a stone into the opening, pushes a rod that drives the piece straight up and down, and the lower disc snags the trapezoid so it can't climb out of the hole. His mouth snaps shut. Silence swallows him whole. A knot of worry tightens in her chest. "Is everything okay?" she asks, and he brushes it off with a quick, "Oh yes. I swore I couldn't pull it off. Then I tore through my doubts and made it happen." He pulled it off. Maybe the goddess's blessing is whispering in his mind, and they pause to bask in their victory. They bask in a blissful calm. Chagusa wonders aloud if they'll start digging soon, and he cuts in, reminding her, first, they must forge the lift pipe and the casing pipe. He locks eyes with her and says he'll need her support as they push forward. Her stomach flips, but she swears she'll unleash everything she's got the moment their short pause ends. They plunge back into their work. Jiro slams a slab of wood into her hands, exactly the right thickness. She whittles it into a long stick and they wrap a sheet of bark around it. Bind the bark tight, rip the stick free, and suddenly it becomes a water pipe. Once the bark is set in time, it locks into a hardened shell, bearing weight without snapping and refusing to rot even as water pours through it. After watching Sojiro's work, Chagusa steps up and dives headfirst into crafting the next few items. She gives him one of her earlier creations and asks how many more are required. He informs her that they need around 4 because it's 4 meters deep. Yukama ran the geological survey earlier and slammed a stake into the exact spot they'll hit water. Soju swears that's the deepest a hand pump can go. Relief surged through her. "Why are you drilling holes in the pipe?" Chagusa snapped. She zeroes in on Soju's every move, eyes razor sharp. The lower casing pipe gets peppered with tiny holes along its sides. Groundwater barrels through those gaps and floods the interior. The hand pump yanks water up, and before long they've completed enough pipes with that method. Jiro bellows it's time to start digging the well. They gouge a small starter hole at the spot to make the job easier, drive the shovel into the ground to rip the soil apart, then dig straight down about a meter. They plant the casing pipe in the hole and drive it down like a stake. Then he turns to Chagusa and asks him to tend it. She unleashes shadow magic and rips an octopus into being, its massive dark tentacle doing the heavy lifting. While it unfolded, doubt gnawed at Sojiru. Was that chant even doing anything? She says every time she does it, a fierce strength surges through her. A crooked smile curls on his lips as he falls silent. Inside, a reluctant thought admits maybe it's true. "Okay, I'll keep pushing it," he says. He jerks to a halt midway. "Wait, he started saying it too, right?" Chagusa smiles. A sudden click tells him they're connected, and guilt stabs at him for making a high school girl worry. He pictures it in sharp focus, says it aloud, and the whole thing snaps into place. A sudden, almost divine answer seemed to answer him. Maybe that's what she meant, he realized. "Back to the pump!" Jiru slammed the pipe, rammed the casing home, then they slid the drill in and began twisting it. You yank the drill out, rip clods of dirt loose, and repeat the motion over and over. Lucky him. Chagusa tackles the toughest missions, bending darkness to her will with her shadow control spell. A whirlpool rips open as the ground overturns beneath her, and her shadow hungrily devours the flying dirt. It catapults the whole process into high gear, and Jiru's jaw drops as he watches. A massive lifeline, since he admits hauling all that dirt and sand is a brutal hassle, even with the right tools. He bellows encouragement, spurring her to press on. They snap another pipe extension on and run the whole routine again. When the pipe smacks Sojiro, it hits unlike before. He presses his ear to the metal in a heartbeat, and Chagusa does the same. They both held their breath, ears fixed on the frantic splash of water coming from inside. They shoved the lift pipe down into the casing, the tip pocked with holes and wrapped in a cloth filter that stops sand from sneaking in. They flood it to the brim for testing. The moment water gushed into the pipe, they knew they'd struck a water layer. Now they could finally set up the hand pump. The big reveal hits. They pour priming water into the pump, chasing out the air until a vacuum snaps into place. Sojiro slams the lever and water surges to life, roaring through the pipes. Victory erupts. They did it. He spins aside, carving out space for Chagusa to seize her chance. They slam the lever, hands trembling with excitement, eyes wide and buzzing at what they'd just pulled off. A sly grin curls on Jiro's lips as he watches her, his memory snapping to Yukitama's promise that she'd handle the drainage. Now it's on them to forge a proper water outlet and weave it into the surroundings. Sojiro greets her and Misty replies, "I'm here again. Heard you were digging a well. How is it already finished?" she asks. Sogera declares Chago's support carried the whole operation, and Misty's eyes light up with impressed awe. Already there, Misty eyes her feet and decides to wash them, and Sojiro bolts for a towel, snatching it up in a heartbeat. The elf girl savored the cool water, then shot Chagusa a curious look, itching to know what he'd done while they sat by the basin, just as she was about to respond. The Matsukas lunged at her the instant Sojiro reappeared, clutching the towel. Matsukas violently shakes water from his drenched fur, sending droplets flying everywhere. Seeing Chagusa soaked to the bone, our main character lunged for extra towels. Misty leaned in and asked, "Can you stand?" While tears blurred Chagusa's vision, every effort of the day crashing into this moment, so she grits her teeth, summons strength, and fights to rise. A lone cabin ripped free from the grid and swallowed by the wilderness. So what exactly is an off-grid cabin? Picture a building, or an entire lifestyle, that refuses to lean on public services, powering itself and running completely off-grid. Jiro compares it to carving a lone cabin miles into the remote, wild heart of the woods. If you love nature, you've probably seen that idea before. Jiru's spark ignited binge-watching bushcraft videos, and Chagusa blurts, "Is that what you're up to now?" She scoffed, Isn't a video a bit dull? While Misty stared, baffled. What even is a video? And when Chagusa asked, Soju shot back that clips of girls doing it rack up massive views. It was a disastrous move. Chagusa storms in and catches him red-handed. You mean the videos with flashy thumbnails starring women? He could only grin, fingers jittering. After a beat, he sighed and shot back, You really just said that. Misty's grin snaps into place and she pounces, ribbing him about ogling breasts while he protests he was only pointing out those kinds of videos pull massive views. Chagusa snatches him again, and he's reduced to a squint as she effortlessly twists the vibe to suit her. Her. Forget her. We're diving right back into the cabin. He fires off that A-frame cabins come in a huge range of designs and confesses he's itching to build one as his own relaxation hideaway. Right now, only the separate huts, the storage shed, and the dining space boast roofs. There isn't a designated spot to take a break. He carves the place into a dining arena and a chill sanctuary, convinced every meal tastes richer when it has its own space away from the couch. Misty's fine with it, so why is he hell-bent on talking it over with her? He vows to forge a colossal one, so it'll take him a few days to finish. He sheepishly admits there are other genuinely helpful things he could build, and he grapples with whether it's really okay to sink time into something like this. Silence snaps as the two girls lock eyes on him, trade a sharp, knowing glance, then speak. Misty flashes a grin, tells him she appreciates that he's thinking of them, pushes him to chase his own desires, and soothes his doubts. I believe you're absolutely free to create whatever sets your soul on fire. Chagusa snaps her hand up, poised to cut through the silence with her words. She's already staked out a bed in the bathroom. She needs nothing else. Desperation cracks her voice as she pleads, If I'm still employed, they won't kick me out, will they? Misty slaps Sojiro's back playfully and grins, reminding him that now divine power flows through her, so they need to revel in it and wring every spark out of this crazy situation. Those words were all Jiro needed to hear. He froze, heat climbing his neck as shyness slammed into him. He shot a fierce thank you to both of them, then sprinted straight into the relaxation area. They locked arms with Chagusa and hatched a daring plan. Just then, a voice crowed that Sojiru had finally fashioned a proper bed for his wonderful fairy. It's the setup. She pores over the plans as Sojiru scoffs that this tiny fairy's pride outshines most humans. She snaps, I can't stand the word big, glare searing him. Take it back or I'll bombard you with cedar pollen. He nearly blurts, Is it glass? And Sora shoots him down instantly. No, it's not. She conjures gossamer, see-through walls from nothing but wood, water, and a silky, moss-dissolving brew. Oh, Masubi, she blurts. I'll handle most of it. Masubi's materials carried equal weight, and when she asked if she should forge it, Jiro simply dropped his head, silence answering for him. Moments later, Scenario burst in gripping a CNF film she'd shrunk with a flash of her fairy power, and Jiro's jaw dropped. This was next level. Trees are massive bundles of tightly compressed cellulose fibers, and CNF shrinks that cellulose into nanofibers a staggering 1,110,000th the width of a human hair. Scenario slaps a CNF film onto the table, a one-of-a-kind paper made from CNF that mimics the performance of many polymers, and Chagusa zeroes in to scrutinize it. Soju rattles off the specs. The material is feather-light to carry, ferociously tough and completely sealed. Stronger than steel and airtight, and its fibers are thinner than the wavelength of visible light, so light slips right through. Saint proclaims they can spin this into windows, and Jiru already knows they can pull it off. They pull it off flawlessly so this clever fairy can use it as a bedroom with no problems. Saria agrees with him. Concern etched on his face, Jiro leans in and urgently reminds her, This is still a shared space, don't forget. So Jiro snarls, You think that because you can handle it, this space is yours? You left her alone. Sanaya hesitated for a beat, then shot down the claim, and that sudden hush gave you away. You were weighing it. It, he remarked. Instead of refusing, Sina dissolves into thin air. Come on, Sojiro rasped, and with every supply laid out, they plunged into building. A-frame cabins are brutally simple. Build a wedge-shaped box big enough for a person to step inside. They slammed down a massive stone base, hoisted up a square frame, and nailed thin boards across the floor. They sandwich CNF film into double-glazed windows, trapping an air layer between the panes that seals out water and turns the glass into a powerful insulator. They line up sturdy wooden boards like soldiers, snap them into place, and just like that, the floor is complete. Then Chagusa shapes the shadows into a section that doubles as both roof and walls, while they seize two wooden beams already joined at an angle and plant them on the floor. In a flash, the framework snaps to life, and Jiro and Chagusa stand shoulder to shoulder studying their project. She points at the peak and declares it a triangular tent, and he nods in agreement. As they prepped to raise the walls, Sojiro set Chagusa to work laying the loft floor, and she grinned ear to ear, thrilled that the cramped, dim little nook would suit her perfectly. Sojiro jabs a finger at the rafters and declares they need windows up top. She lights up and leaps forward to help install them. Once the outer walls and windows snap into place, Sojiro slaps the CNF film onto the walls, sealing them into a waterproof barrier. While he worked, Chagusa's jaw tightened. Why hadn't he just unleashed the magical tool to lock everything down? Craft gear might hold things, but it couldn't shut out both searing heat and relentless water. He leans forward, eyes sharp. So they might still need the CNF film. You mean that thing that seals a bucket so tight not a single drop can escape, right? He asks. The moment Chagusa agrees, that's the one she means. Jiro warns it could choke off the air and leave them all gasping, a spike of dread shooting through her, so he methodically tackles each issue, one by one. They slapped the film down, stacked boards on top, then smothered the whole thing in inky black paint. Just days after they kicked off work on the new cabin, it's finally finished. They've planted an A-frame cabin in the yard. Misty sizes him up and asks how he felt during the build, and Jiro admits it was brutal. When he saw the final result, his jaw dropped. It shattered every expectation and screamed that it was totally worth a shot. Her smile flares to life because his words are carved with the precision of a master artisan. She's forced to concede the design is brilliant. The artifact braids clashing magical energies and alien materials from different races into a single balanced current that hums with power but never overpowers. She turns to him and says it outright, then grins and adds that, though it looks simple, it bursts with a warm, irresistibly pleasant vibe. Jiro gapes at her, confusion flooding his face. He hadn't expected such a thoughtful take on his work, and his mind reels. What does she mean by magical ability? He freezes on that part, baffled as the line reads like something an elf would whisper. Out of nowhere, Scenario crashes into the conversation, and Misty flashes a grin, announcing she's an elf so no one misses it. The fairy snaps back that it's good the elves care about appearances and feelings, but they all too often fail to see the harm their actions wreak on others. She spits, "That's why so many call elves arrogant," and the words slam into Misty. If Scenario stalls and doesn't pick her words the moment she first sees something, it'll be too late. You can say your piece later, but the moment vanishes. Scenario alights on Soju's shoulder, grinning as she doles out that teasing like a sacred fairy rite, and the elves blurt it out without meaning to, making it all the more maddening. The Scenario yanks them back. Magic sparkles, but the new building demands their full attention. She taps the bare wall, no decorations, yet every plank gleams, hand-polished and chosen to hide the knots, so you can feel the quiet beauty of a culture that reveres wood's natural grain. She points out that slapping solid black onto a building might seem like perfect forest camouflage, but turning a defined shape into a black silhouette only makes it leap out and demand attention. Light ricochets off the sturdy wooden walls, bathing the room in a warm, cozy glow. The room screams craftsmanship, the work of a nice master of detail. She finished pouring out her thoughts on the new common space. Jiro's face flushed crimson as he blurted, "Do you really feel that way?" And relief crashed over him when he realized everything had turned out exactly as he'd hoped. Misty's jaw drops as he bites the boastful fair's bait. She leans in, tells Sojiro she had the same thought, and Scenario grabs the win. Irritating as she is, she's right. Good taste isn't everything. Sojiro storms in to calm the chaos, snapping that Chagusa poured so much effort into this project, too. The girl, still rattled by what Sonaria did, pleads, "Please don't send me into the fight. I'm just a little stone on the ground," and shrinks back. At the last second, Jiro lunges and yanks her inside. They sprint to explore their new shared place with Misty nipping at their heels, and the instant they step inside, Misty and Saintia lock eyes on a freshly made bed. Exactly what the fairy asked for, a double air mattress. She flops onto the bed, grinning that the room screams, perfect for romance. The dazzling fairy in her scores it a 70 out of 100 and gushes that Sojuru's burning eagerness to make it happen steals the show. Jiru slammed his fist into the ground beside Scenario, hurling her through the air. He'd had enough. Are you seriously saying all that work to decode the creator's intent was just leading up to that joke? She stares blankly, and it drives him wild with irritation. He strides up to Misty, calming her with a steady, "Don't worry." Then the truth slams into him. Fairies are wicked to the core. The other person gives a sharp nod. The bed frame folds up effortlessly. Disassemble it. Snap the legs inward, and it shrinks to half its original size. It even doubles as a bench tucked beneath the large window on his right. He snaps his finger at the top and warns a dark film clings there. Pull it down and it will blot out the view from outside. Exactly as Chagusa asked, Misty nodded, her smile sealing the agreement. Sometimes it's nicer to shut the sunlight out. Their gaze snaps to the window's focal point. He shoves it. It swings wide and throws the wooden deck into view. Misty's gaze snapped it around, astonishment burning in her wide eyes at the unexpected addition. There, the exact expression Soju had been craving. Chagusa gasps, wondering if this is a hidden base, and Scenario, looking down at her, snaps that remarks like that only make Chagusa look worse, especially since Mistia and Soju are the most thrilled. Embarrassment slammed into Chagusa at the remark. Soju watched the young people fizz with overblown excitement and couldn't stop thinking about it. Now that the cabin's built, they finally have space to relax. But what does he mean by that? With fresh water and space to rest, they're safe. Whether they sprint to the village for supplies or haul in something gigantic, Chagusa finally gets it. Jiro grins and declares the town is packed with incredible shops, and he's determined to snatch up any useful thing he can craft there. He's sure it'll please them, he says. They handcraft one-of-a-kind treasures and drop them for sale now and then. He splurges on a few luxuries and basks in the laid-back life he's always dreamed of. Chagusa lunges forward to help, and he seizes her offer with a relieved, grateful grin. He's ready to charge in and pour every ounce of himself into it, but for now he vows to finally unwind. Could that be Eurify? In town, Cedric and Darrow still grapple with a stubborn problem. Remember the twin venom snakes Mistia and Soju felled a few chapters ago? Darrow and Vic are still hunting for a buyer for an antidote that cures the deadliest poisons Sadak brought. And Sadak barged in with hopeful news. He might have found one after a prince was wounded in a fight and poison seeped into the wound. Since that moment, the boy has been fighting to survive, so Darrow asks if Sadak was dealing with a royal supplier. Nope, even crazier. He's been speaking with the king himself, dude, seriously. Darrow shoves the antidote into older Sadak's hands, barking that he must lock it down in his area. Dread coils in Sadak. If anything fails on his watch, it could spark a major crisis. Sedge refuses because his warehouse is already bursting with clutter. Darrow insists on tossing the junk. The idea rips him apart. He can't believe he'd call it trash. And his storage is the neatest, most obsessively arranged spot around. His son urged Seth to just leave it there. So why the uproar? If they own up to it, everything should be fine, right? Said bristles. He's got a point. Darryl already warned that if this blows up, they'll be the ones to blame. And joking aside, Saeed stares at the older man and asks if he's really okay with this, his voice tight with dread about what'll happen when Soju returns. Daru promises Soju will be fine for over a year on the supplies he packed, and he's stashed plenty of spices and medicine for Soju. He can swing by and grab them any time. If more people swarm in, or magical beasts strike, he'll race back in a heartbeat, don't you think? Said Gwanders. What if instead of gathering items, he turns up to hawk even more wares? What is this guy talking about? Darryl points out they've lent Soju so much he could hibernate for a decade and it wouldn't matter. Sadak snaps back with a sharper comparison and a grin. If one of my paintings sells for a good price, I'll crank out even more, no matter how many there already are. Money! The older man's features snapped into an annoyed grimace. He knew it was true. True. He prays Soju stays asleep. Meanwhile, Daru's frustration tightens into resolve as he mulls a quick return to town, absently stroking Matsuka's. Scenario flashes a beguiling smile and, like a curveball, tosses out, "Master, I would like a feast." Jiro freezes mid-task and echoes, "A feast?" He zeroed in on her seat and couldn't resist blurting, Is that barrel full of sake? The scene proves his hunch dead on. Chagusa, listen up. The Great Fairy is secretly harboring a motive to forge a truce with Dark JK. She's convinced humans crave the company of fairies, pulled back to them before long. But Chaguzi's behavior toward her leaves a cold knot in her gut. Soju's gut screamed. Sina's inner tyrant was still clawing its way out. This dazzling fairy knows Sokka can weave people together, so she's throwing a lavish banquet to seal her bond with the Dark JK. Before she forgets, Scenario thrusts a finger at the massive bag on the table that Soju just spotted. He strides up to it and snaps, "Did she bring it?" She snaps on her aviator sunglasses and, with a lazy grin, casually marvels that fairies are linked to plants. Scenario slams the bag open and thrusts her hand inside, then yanks out a gleaming white object. Sojuru freezes as the amazing fairy peers over her glasses and snaps, "Do you know what this is worth?" Yet he only stares, unbelieving. Because it's rice. He's left dumbstruck as Sanaya dives in and lands on his shoulder. She gives his earlobe a playful yank and dares, "Isn't this worth lifting the lid? All we have to do is have a drink. Is that fine with you?" Jiro finally turns, awe blazing in his eyes as he whispers, "Thank you. I can't believe it. You can actually get rice." He beams, and for the Sina area, it's a breeze. But first, can she come back to Sojiro right now? "Should I sculpt a statue?" he asks. "Which do you prefer, stone or wood?" The enchanting fairy reels at his response, disbelief sparking as she wonders if he's truly serious. Jiro swears he'd pick anything over 1,000 pleasures. If she ever needs anything, just ask. Scenaria squints and goes stone-cold serious. She craves only one thing from him. The kind fairy leaned in and implored him to watch his words from now on. Confusion snapped across Jiro's face as he leaned in, hungry for her to spell it out. The scene rips the truth wide open. He can't fathom how priceless beings like her are when he measures them against divine tools. She tells him so. Rice and scraps mean nothing. The forest ahead is reserved for Sojuru alone, so he shouldn't hide his claim. He needs to stride in and seize it. Everything about the scene screams it. If he wants out, he can break free from this forest. Conquering and uniting the world's largest kingdom would be child's play. They'd sweep up every treasure and luxury, hoarding the planet's comforts like it meant nothing. Guess what? In a forest like this, you can drop a tiny container into plain sight. You don't have to hide it. She slammed a question at Soju he'd never even imagined. How do you contain a power that could annihilate everything? And the regalia, what becomes of it? Rule and devour like a god, conquer everything in your path? If that happens, Misty will be breathless, thrilled and amazed by me, he shot back. Worry carved his features, and Scenario would revel in that sight. Sojuru scoffs and tosses the thought aside, refusing to give it an inch. Convinced it was an exaggerated tale, he raked a hand through his hair in bewilderment and told the wonderful fairy that instead of receiving rice, he'd rather share mouth-watering treats with dazzling fairies. His words knock her off balance. Scenario's smile spreads and she slides in close. "If you're going to offer me something," she says, "replace the item I borrowed from a friend's storage." She snaps on those shady shades again, thrusts her hands out like she's about to grab a wad of cash, and in a heartbeat hardens into a tough-as-nails enforcer. She fired that at them. This sum was nothing, just a single grain of rice. Was she hinting others were involved? Jiro let out a slow sigh, nodded, and said, "All right, then." He'll craft a heartfelt masterpiece to thank those people. The Scenario flatly declares that's just the way it is. They can snap into doll form, so we're covered, though they're not what you'd call human. That's decided. Now Sojiro must blurt the banquet news to the other two as the room explodes. "Hooray, sake! Hooray, rice!" And Misty and Chagusa twirl together. They clutch the two new gifts Sojiro just handed them, grinning like maniacs as Maka rockets around. At the same time, Sojiro and Cineria watch from the sidelines. Cineria silent. But Sojiro feels the kind fairy's displeasure flare at what's unfolding. To silence doubts, he strode in bearing sake and rice, desperate to join the celebration and connect with everyone. Enough! The great fairy isn't happy. She locks eyes on him, thoughts churning, and snaps, "I won't give in, I never asked for that." Sanaya lashed him with a dagger stare. Too bad for her. Misty couldn't care less about Sanaya's feelings. She finds those antics adorable and relishes it. Who would have guessed the elf adored sake? She's practically giddy at the thought of eating rice. Jiro opens his mouth to scold her, but her compliments melt his resolve and he revels in every praise. Then he snaps his head toward Chagusa. Check it out. Our local goth girl is gasping, whispering the same words again and again like a cold, hypnotic chant. He stood helpless as she drifted in a daze, desperate for Chagusa to finally acknowledge the wonderful fairy's deeds. Then Chagusa dropped 4 words that wrecked him. It's been 4 years. So Jiro can only bury his face when he finds out poor Chagusa hasn't tasted rice in 4 years. No wonder she's so thin. And he won't let her meet Sanaya, so just like that, everyone jumps in to get tonight's feast ready. Chagusa prowls the forest for mushrooms and wild plants with Yukitama glued to her side, the beast spirit guiding her hand so she plucks only the right ones. Chagusa beams at the carpet of grass and mushrooms bursting to life around them. Sanaya dives in, plucking the choicest caps and crowing about her uncanny knack for finding the best. Chagusa isn't put off by that snobby attitude. She straight up idolizes her. Misty, the only member of the river shrimp hunting team, reels in a massive shrimp, and Jiro gapes at the sheer size of the catch. He leans in, watching the crustacean's flavor slip away by the second, and blurts to Misty he has to catch more to taste it. Misty raises an eyebrow and asks if that's really necessary. Or maybe Sojiro's got a particular taste. He insists Japanese people love seafood, and when Misty hears that she teases he's like a mermaid, blurting, "You wouldn't want to eat a mer-person, would you?" What does she mean by that? He shrugs. There aren't any mer-people in Japan. What? Freeze! Hold on a second! He freezes, wondering if mermaids even count as merry people. Misty catches his eye, a laugh bubbling at the corner of her mouth, but his expression snapped into stone-cold seriousness, and she went ghost-pale. He fires out, "Just joking." Then again, "Just joking." Jiro tosses it up to hide his pride, and relief floods me. Terror clenched her chest. She splashed water exactly as he instructed, while Sojiro chose to lock the story of the 8 white giant dragons away from her. As soon as everyone snatches the ingredients, they split up and bolt toward their next jobs. Misty snatches up the nut flour, holding it steady with fierce focus. Chagusa hunches over the stone mill and grinds the dried seeds into fine flour with relentless focus. Sojiro cradles each blade, sharpening and oiling them until the edges sing. He slices the vegetables and takes a tiny bite to feel the crunch. So far, they taste fine. Misty then tries the river shrimp she caught, and even boiled with just a pinch of salt, it explodes with bold flavor, turning out shockingly delicious. A few steps away, we explode into a sprint and crash down beside him. Tail thumping, the furry spirit stared hungrily at his owner. Jiro asked a quick question, then flung a chunk of meat straight into the creature's waiting mouth. Makus lunges, snatching the package in his jaws. He whirls in giddy circles, laughter spilling from him. Watching him, Sojiro's face breaks into a warm, helpless smile. He jabbed the morsel at his furry buddy and shot the question, "Is it delicious?" Mankus slipped up to Sojiro again, eyes gleaming, desperate for another treat. Sojiro's gentle reminder that he'd already had one deflates Mankus. Crestfallen, he slinks away with his ears and tail drooping. Sojiro was about to dive back into his chores when a low murmur nearby snagged his attention. He bristled, primed to scold Mankus again. He slammed to a halt as Misty dropped to her knees, desperately begging for just one bite. Her eyes squeezed shut, and her mouth hung wide as Sojiro gaped in disbelief. What kind of lure is this? But the soft-hearted guy tossed her a chunk of meat. Just like he'd done for Mankus moments ago, he made another slice of meat vanish in a heartbeat. The playful elf girl then summoned a friend, and Chagusa dropped to his knees, heart racing as he wondered if he could be like Mankus. Sojiro had no choice but to shove a bite her way. Moments later, they slammed the final preparations into place, and the celebration exploded into a roaring toast. They hoist their beer-filled glasses high and slam them together, igniting the celebration. The beer hits with a burst of fruity aroma and a crisp, refreshing snap. A sly tang sharpens the meat's flavor, and the foam, surprisingly, crowns the whole taste. Each meal slams a plain meat steak onto a wooden platter, grilled right on the board so smoke sinks into every bite. Misty takes a bite, and her eyes light up. It's phenomenal. She's stunned because she usually cooks meat, but this one radiates a deep, earthy scent. Next up, they bring out fried fish, dredged in a blend of potato starch and wheat flour, then fried until the crust goes golden and crackles crisp. Salt stings Sajiro's tongue, but he grins. Misty pairs perfectly with the beer. He leans in and asks Zenaria if the food's doing anything for her. She's exhausted today and he expects it to cheer her up. But the stuck-up fairy, true to form, snaps at him not to ruin the vibe. Scenario tears into a plate of tempura. Wild greens, mushrooms, and river fish swaddled in a light white batter and fried into a shattering crisp. So Yeru whipped up a river shrimp paella, bathing each shrimp in aromatic herbs and shimmering oil so every bite exploded with mouthwatering flavor. Chagusa sobs, savoring her tempura rice bowl, and then, for the first time in years, she bursts out, happy tears streaming down her face. Misty stared, confusion knotting in her chest at the tears, and Jiro darted forward to explain that Mistia had often complained about how unappealing the food was in the other world. She earned huge props for getting through that, right? Mistia scoffs that if that were true, Chagusa could have just cooked her meals like Sojiro does. She rockets into their chat, crowing that a great fairy like her might not cook but can spark joy, only to discover that in another world 99% of her kind can't cook either. Jiro burns to reach that elusive 1%, yet Scenario calmly reminds him they live a peaceful life. They bantered while the feast blazed on into the dead of night. Finally, with plates scraped clean, only the campfires flicker and their quiet company lingered. Misty shatters the silence, her voice slicing through the air. The truth slams in. Those who practice dark magic often feast on humans. Chagusa pipes up that they also weave illusions, and Scenario reels, asking aloud why that would happen. She couldn't shake the question. How could Chagusa unleash dark magic with not a shred of belief? Maybe the court quietly swept her case under the rug. No, Chagusa scoffs, declaring this a cakewalk she'll crush. Her faith in Shonen Jump glows like a beacon, and that idea rips a sharp pang through Sojiro. His deepest regret is that he died before he could finish the manga he loved. Chagusa shares that same hollow ache, and Mistia leans in, asking what kind of manga they were talking about. Chagusa grins and tosses out, "You've heard about it, right?" Mistia, honestly out of the loop, admits she doesn't get manga debates but leans in, curious if he exposes how Chegus's whispers mirror that secret, leaving the other person squirming. That's why the story is branded forbidden. Since they arrived, Chagusa thinks they might as well go for it. Let's discuss Chagusa's journey of being reborn in another world. A high school girl with the ability to cheat sets out to create delicious treats. She tells us as she moves and finally reveals Chagusa. She remembers one Monday morning rushing to school, tumbling down the station stairs, warmth flooding her. She slammed her eyes shut, and in the thick black she found a gate. Chagusa's eyes snapped open to a forest drowned in shadow. A cold certainty struck her. She'd stepped into another world, and the new life of Yono Chagusa had begun. Thrown into a strange realm, Chagusa's memories evaporated. She froze, scrambling to recall where her school was and who her friends even were. Then the brutal truth hit. There'd never been a way up from the start, and she stood drowning in old feelings in a place that felt completely foreign. Goblins explode from the shadows and swarm her. Chagusa rockets up the nearest tree, and amid the chaos, a terrified syllable slips from her lips, a spell she never learned. She discovered dark magic inside her. It surged with a ridiculous flumpstone and dragged her to safety. What does flumpstone even mean? Chagusa stumbled out of the woods and suddenly found herself in a town. A guard blocked her at the entrance. She had no cash, only yen from her old world. He eyed the strange coin, grudgingly took it and let her pass, and Chagusa spent the entire 2 yen and 90 cents on tolls, ending up broke as she wandered. She crossed paths with a wandering mage who pushed her toward the Adventurers Guild, so she threw her lot in and signed up. Then learned the guild demands a goblin's right ear as proof of a kill, a brutal rule she flat out refuses. The concierge warned hunting and logging were banned in the forest near town, yet she shoved Chagusa forward to storm in and cut down the monsters without hesitation, and Chagusa knew adventurers can meet a grim fate. It's a terrifying, brutal reality. She hatched a daring plan. Abandon that life, hoard every coin, snag some sugar, and spin it into irresistible treats. Perched in the treetops after picking off a few goblins, Chagusa grins and says the only isekai she knows is about someone who conquered the world with desserts. Except in this realm, sugar costs a fortune. Chagusa drops from the tree, heart buzzing with the dream that if her treats catch on, she'll open a shop and sink into a life of comfort, throws a wistful wave at her wild existence, and is so lost in daydreams she doesn't even notice someone nearby. A swordsman roars, "You! You're the mage who just arrived!" He leans in, voice sharp as he asks if that spell was dark magic and admits that if so, it's an insanely rare skill. Beside him, a wary girl hangs back from Chagusa and whispers it's her first time seeing magic like that. Hold up, she actually said that? Is that going to be a problem? Did our girl really drop those words with a stone-cold face? The man recoiled, snapping that he didn't mean it that way, and his friend leveled a cutting glare at Chagusa. Seriously?